Hello everyone, I believe I am live. Welcome back to Tomlinson Talks on Thursday the 5th of February 2026, and it's no exaggeration to say that this is going to be a monumental show, because Keir Starmer is on the precipice of being chucked out of number 10 Downing Street. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he has only days left when Labour MPs are putting their names to declarations saying that he should resign. The vultures are circling overhead, and it's only a few hours until they get to feast. But I hope you are all having an excellent week. Chat, I will be keeping an eye on it throughout. Remember to send your super chats in. If they are pertinent at the time they are sent in, I will address them. If not, I will save them for the end of the show. But we have plenty of material to get into today, as you can imagine. This is going to be a comprehensive look at the Peter Mandelson drama in relation to the Epstein Files, and not just its impact on Keir Starmer's ability to remain Prime Minister, but also an examination of the tendrils of Peter Mandelson throughout the broader Labour Party, the government, and the British state, and the implications the Epstein Files themselves might have for the Labour Party. And before I begin this stream, I want to make it very clear that when I talk about individuals and groups those individuals may be affiliated with, I am not condemning everyone from that group or from that given country. I just want to make it very, very clear that that is the case. And now that we can all behave like adults, as I'm sure you will, chat, because remember, I do not live in a free country, and the people I'm talking about are currently running the government with the power to send the police to my door and arrest me, or at least take my YouTube channel offline, we can begin by talking about Peter Mandelson, the Prince of Darkness. Now, if you don't know who Peter Mandelson is, he is the son of George Norman Mandelson, who was the advertising manager at the Jewish Chronicle, and his grandfather, Norman Mandelson, founded the Harrow United Synagogue. And I bring that up because that will be pertinent in discussing the ethnic nature of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, as well as his broader financial and political influence network. It is an unfortunate reality that that is the case, but if you don't mention it, then you are just leaving a large element out of the broader story, as lots of the British media have at the moment, by saying Jeffrey Epstein is an agent of Russia. It's just like, just Russia. Right. Anyway, he was the Labour MP for Hartlepool under Tony Blair from 1992 to 2004. He was given life peerage on the 13th of October 2008, and then he was appointed as Gordon Brown's business secretary. That's after he had served as a minister, and he had resigned in 1998 when it was revealed he had received a secret loan from a ministerial colleague called Jeffrey Robinson of £373,000. Less than a year later, he returned as Northern Ireland Secretary before quitting again in 2001 under some sort of allegation of a passport application for two Indian-sounding brothers called the Hinduja brothers. He was later cleared of wrongdoing during an inquiry. And then he served as the first Secretary of State from the 5th of June 2009 to the 11th of May 2010. So he has earned the nickname Prince of Darkness because he has been the second or third in command to Sir Tony Blair for a very long time, and inexplicably, he has remained a permanent fixture of Labour governments. He's basically Labour's equivalent of Michael Gove. Not that I'm saying that they have the same behaviour or the same connections, though Gove will come up during the stream, but in the fact that they always seem to land themselves a cabinet job. And when they don't have a cabinet job, when they aren't being brought into the fold, they tend to cause trouble until they are. So, Dominic Green wrote up a summary of the scandal in the Wall Street Journal. Green is a solid journalist, so I thought we'd go to him for this. Mandelson resigned from the Labour Party on Sunday, saying he regretted his friendship with Mr. Epstein and wished to spare the party further embarrassment. Bit late for that, Pete. When Blair was Prime Minister, he resigned twice, as Trade Secretary in 1998 and Northern Ireland Secretary in 2001. Mandelson denied breaking the law and wasn't charged, despite a Cabinet Office report on reputational risks, which we'll be reading elements from, according to New Statesman reporting. Starmer appointed him as the US ambassador in December 2024, praising his unrivaled experience. The scandal, for Starmer, centres around the fact that he knew that Peter Mandelson maintained a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein had been convicted for child sex trafficking in 2008. He knew that before appointing him US ambassador, and he didn't know the extent to which Epstein's relationship with Mandelson involved, for example, trading state secrets, an act potentially of treason on Mandelson's part, and also allegedly giving Mandelson thousands of dollars in direct bank transfers, which Mandelson claims he has no recollection of. I think you would remember if you got 75 grand from an international financier with a private island. Oh, and a paedophile. But anyway, the other part of the scandal is, of course, why Starmer feels the need to rely on Mandelson and his proxy, Morgan McSweeney, so much, but we'll be getting into that in a bit. Now, Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, summarised here, among the 3 million files so far released by the Department of Justice, and I must say, well done to Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I believe Nancy Mace was involved in this as well, in their efforts to push the Trump administration to publish the files. Because I was glad that President Trump got elected in late 2024. We were all optimistic for a golden age. And among the things the administration has mishandled, don't get me wrong, there are still friends that are going to be viewing this broadcast that are working in the administration, not getting the credit they deserve for doing excellent things at the State Department, trying to help we beleaguered populations of Britain and Europe. But among the failures from President Trump himself and some of his appointees like Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi, who's the Ice Barbie one? Kristi Noem. Killed her dog. Among the failures that are frankly inexplicable and unforgivable are the Epstein Files. Trump lied and said he was going to release them all, then that they didn't exist. Pam Bondi said they were sitting on her desk. Then they did that fake launch with a bunch of influencers that showed up and themselves got duped. Like, I know Jack Posobiec, he's a really good guy. He never would have gone along and picked that up if he would have known that it was just stuff that had already been released, repackaged as a hoax release, trying to throw people off the scent of the real files. And then Trump himself said, it's a Democrat hoax. And then we find out there are 3 million files they've currently published, a further 3 million they're set to publish, and possibly even more. So, unacceptable, I'm afraid. Complete egg on the face of the administration, ahead of the midterms. And it turns out that we, in Britain, have a right to be pissed off with the Trump administration, because withholding this would have prevented accountability on this issue, not just from Mandelson, but Keir Starmer. People leaking state secrets. People at the highest level of the Labour government being in direct communication with, or only one step removed from, people in direct communication with, the world's most notorious paedophile, and, seems like, financial saboteur, given the conduct of Epstein in the emails. But anyway, I did want to say thank you to... I met Massey once, he seems like a good guy. Nancy Mace followed me on Twitter after I said that people should denaturalise and deport Ilhan Omar or the government isn't legitimate anymore, and then she brought the proceedings forward to strip Ilhan Omar of her committee assignments. So, patriots? I know Marjorie Taylor Greene has crashed out a little bit recently, but well done to her at least on this. Anyway, among the files released were hundreds of texts and emails between Mandelson and Epstein, and he called Epstein his best pal. Some exchanges appear to show Mandelson, then business secretary in Brown's government, sharing confidential and market-sensitive information after the 2008 financial crisis. In one, Mandelson offers details of a conversation between Larry Summers, then director of the National Economic Council, and Alistair Darling, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer. All these exchanges occurred after Epstein's conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008. Quote, need to talk feeling confused, Mandelson emailed in April 2009 when Epstein was under house arrest. 2 months later, Nick Butler, a special advisor to the Prime Minister, emailed Brown recommending the leader spur Britain's economic recovery by releasing value from the very substantial asset base which the government holds. Mandelson was copied in on the message and then forwarded it to Jeffrey Epstein, who asked, what saleable assets? In October 2009, Brown announced a fire sale of British assets valued at $16 billion, that's $25 million, including the Channel Tunnel, rail link, a toll bridge across the Thames River, and shares in a uranium processing company. This is not the gold that Brown sold off, but it's still Britain's infrastructure, strategic assets that they were selling off because they mismanaged the economy. And so, the implication is, did Jeffrey Epstein and his pals use insider trading knowledge to buy up Britain's infrastructure? This is something now that the Metropolitan Police are apparently investigating, which is one of the reasons why Keir Starmer is saying he can't release all of the information he knew about Mandelson ahead of appointing him British ambassador. But Starmer is just trying to avoid accountability by cloaking his culpability for this in procedure, and it's not convincing anyone. As well as that, in 2009, December 2009, Brown's government was preparing to impose a 50% tax on bankers' bonuses above £25,000. Epstein emailed Mandelson asking if there was, quote, any real chance of making the tax only on the cash portion of the banker's bonus, rather than the more valuable non-cash portions like shares. Trying hard to amend, Mandelson replied, Treasury digging in, but I am on the case. So Jeffrey Epstein was shaping British government financial policy through Peter Mandelson. 2 days later, Mandelson recommended Jamie, potentially Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, that was Epstein's bank. They've since come out and said, oh, we regret links to Epstein. You were profiting off of it for a very long time, though, weren't you? Epstein recommended Jamie Dimon should mildly threaten Darling on the subject. In his autobiography, Darling recalls a very, very angry call from Jamie Dimon. So it seems that the head of JP Morgan Chase was also acting on the instructions of Jeffrey Epstein, thanks to information that had been passed on by Peter Mandelson. On May 9th, 2010, during the Eurozone debt crisis, Mandelson gave Epstein advance notice of what he believed would be a €500 billion bailout to save the Greek economy and stabilise Europe's currency. Quote, just leaving number 10 Downing Street. Will call, Mandelson emailed. The following day he wrote to Epstein and said he'd finally convinced Brown to resign before the Prime Minister announced his decision. On the 31st of March 2010, Mandelson's principal secretary sent him a note summarising a conversation between Summers and Darling, then the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Within minutes, Mandelson forwarded it to Epstein with a caveat, please protect. He was just sharing state secrets. And there's a lot more he did as well. In November 2010, Mandelson emailed Epstein asking his chief life advisor how to avoid taxes on an apartment in Rio de Janeiro that Mandelson was thinking of buying and putting in the name of his partner, now husband, a Brazilian nurse named Ronaldo Avila de Silva. The two married in 2023. Mandelson said he doesn't recall the matter, the documents look false, and that neither he nor Avila de Silva ever owned a property in Brazil, though the latest email suggests that in 2009 Epstein sent Mr. de Silva £10,000 to pay for an osteopathy training course, which Mandelson has now confirmed happened in the time. So again, why would we trust Mandelson on anything? He seems to be a congenital liar. Now Green summarises all of this very well. There are some additional details in the emails themselves, like the fact that in that walk that Mandelson detailed to Epstein, he said, including the underground walk from number 10 to the Ministry of Defence with GB for secret late-night talk with the Libs. So this seems to be around the same time that Mandelson and Brown were proposing a pact with the Liberal Democrats to form a coalition government to stay in. But he's saying there's an underground tunnel that connects number 10 Downing Street to the Ministry of Defence. This has been long rumoured, much like there are underground tunnels connecting, Senate and Congress, or the White House to various bunkers to keep the president safe. But this wasn't confirmed. This is a state secret. So Peter Mandelson seems to have just leaked a state secret to Jeffrey Epstein. Again, treason charges can be brought. I think it's misconduct in public office is the proper charge. And the other one, of course, is just leaving number 10 will call. Sources tell me €500 bailout almost complete. So this is clear potential insider trading because, of course, Epstein could then connect this to his wider financial network and instruct them to make lucrative financial decisions based on full knowledge of the bailout. So Peter Mandelson is a traitor. Full-on traitor. He also seems to be the recipient of funds from Epstein's broader illicit financial network. So apparently Epstein made $75,000 as 55,000 quid of payments to accounts connected to Mandelson. And these are bank statements released by the Department of Justice that suggest this. Between 2003 and 2004, 3 separate payments were apparently sent to Mandelson. Mandelson says he has no record or recollection of receiving the sums and did not know whether the documents were authentic. Okay, but they seem to be the case. And I'm pretty sure the police investigation will turn this up. So is he alleging the Department of Justice fabricated bank statements of Jeffrey Epstein wiring thousands of dollars to Peter Mandelson? I think we can probably believe the bank statements more than Mandelson at this point. And it's because Mandelson has gone to great lengths to obscure the nature of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. But as the emails reveal, he said that he was never leaving Epstein's side. They had a deep emotional attachment to one another, even codependent in some respects, very flirtatious, borderline sexual. And of course, Mandelson is a gay man, and Epstein himself seems to have not been bothered about the genitalia and sex of his sexual partners, nor whether or not they were willing on most occasions. So one can only speculate as to why they had such a deep emotional attachment and went shopping together. Very strange. Anyway, in April 2009, while Epstein was still serving his prison sentence, he messages Lord Mandelson to say, here we go again. A few minutes later, Mandelson picks up his BlackBerry and replies, meaning, at least I'm not involved, and Epstein replied, you romantic complexities. Or your romantic complexities. On the day Epstein was released from jail in July 2009, Epstein says free and home at 8:37 a.m. in the morning on the 22nd of July. How shall we celebrate? Wrote back Mandelson, who at the time was business secretary under Gordon Brown. So while business secretary in the British government, he was wanting to celebrate the release from prison from his friend, the paedophile. Okay. With grace and modesty, those are the names of 2 strippers, Epstein responds. From now on, grace and modesty should be discovered in London, Lord Mandelson jokes. How is freedom feeling? He followed up. She feels fresh, firm and creamy, Epstein says, and Lord Mandelson responded with, naughty boy. These people are disgusting, but they've been running the banks, foreign policy, according to Epstein, brokering interactions between the Israeli government and the Qataris and the Americans and the Russians. But also, they've been running the British government. Like Jeffrey Epstein had direct, continuous influence over the British government during the Blair and Brown years. Okay? When Mandelson told Epstein he is out of government as of May 2010 and at Labour Party headquarters for a farewell event for Gordon Brown, Epstein offered him a big hug and Mandelson replied, you won't leave me, will you? In November 2009, they were discussing pressure on Gordon Brown to resign. What does Tony Blair, presumably, Epstein emailed him, say? Talking to him tonight, but he said, I should facilitate, not initiate, Mandelson wrote. Epstein responds, tell Gordon Brown you see the wind's blowing, you are loyal, first, second and third. I don't suggest you tell him to step down. Tell him you are his friend and is frustrated as much as he. Very similar rhetoric we're going to be seeing coming out of Keir Starmer during this crisis. He will immediately push the panic button, replied Mandelson. He would also be stressed not knowing what you really think, Epstein responds. So he's coaching him on the internal Labour Party affairs upon the potential resignation of the Prime Minister. It is certainly a problem, Mandelson joked back. Cure coming to London from Shanghai next weekend, because Epstein joked, are you sure the back pressure from your lack of sex is not turning your brain into foie gras? These are disgusting perverts and reprobates who, again, have been running our governments and international financial systems and foreign policy for years. In one exchange, Epstein expressed his disappointment that their relationship had been a one-way street. As of 2012, Jeffrey, can I have? Jeffrey, can you give? Jeffrey, can you organise? Can you call? Can you arrange? You have yet to offer real assistance, sign of gratitude or appreciation. Sorry. So Jeffrey Epstein felt like Peter Mandelson's go-between, his dog's body. And Mandelson said, you know how much I appreciate your support, and that during your trials and tribulations I never left your side, I was always there with advice and moral support, and I never turned away. So there's a deep emotional affection between the two of them, as well as a parasocial financial relationship. Also, it seems like Epstein thought that Mandelson was basically running the government. He says, it is about why things happened, not just what happened, the rise, fall and future of a political phenomenon, you, that governed Britain for 13 years, and what happened to me and my life during this rollercoaster ride. He's talking about Mandelson's autobiography draft. So Epstein seems to be suggesting that Mandelson was de facto running Britain, and therefore, if Epstein is giving Mandelson advice on what to say to the Prime Minister, it means that Jeffrey Epstein was basically running Great Britain. So, this man, the world's most notorious paedophile, foreign intelligence agent, general financial and foreign policy troublemaker, but most importantly, the nonce part, was basically running Britain in the Brown years through Peter Mandelson. He also arranged for Bill Clinton to speak at Labour Party conference in 2002 via Peter Mandelson, and Peter Mandelson put, P.S. don't be disgusting, meaning he knew what sort of sexual behaviour Epstein may have been getting up to. So, Mandelson knew. What did Starmer know? Because Starmer, remember, appointed Peter Mandelson as the ambassador to the United States in 2024. He was actually swanning around, I think, at a inauguration party that I had been invited to where Nigel Farage spoke. I think this was the same party that Lord Maurice Glassman had said people were coming up to him and showing him photos of Epstein and Mandelson together. And he then went back to number 10 Downing Street and voiced his displeasure at Mandelson becoming US ambassador and was told, in no uncertain terms, shut up. Anyway, so he was appointed US ambassador. September last year, more revelations come out about the fact that he was still friends with Jeffrey Epstein. After the conviction, Starmer's forced to sack him. Now, as of the Epstein Files coming out, as of the revelations that Epstein was basically coaching Mandelson through his career, that Mandelson was leaking state secrets to Epstein, that Mandelson seems to have taken payments from Epstein. Now we must ask what Starmer knew before appointing him. And Kemi Badenoch, who is usually dreadful, skewered him during a Prime Minister's Questions performance. This doesn't make Kemi any better than she actually is. But this was the moment that will prove fatal to Keir Starmer's tenure as Prime Minister. He's already the most unpopular Prime Minister of all time. His government is one of the most unpopular on record. And now he admits, in the plain view of day, that he knew he selected a man to become US ambassador to our, I think it's fair to say, greatest ally, at least our best invention. He knew that that man was friends with the world's most notorious paedophile after he had already been convicted, and then appointed him anyway.
I am asking the Prime Minister something very specific, not about the generalities of the full extent. Can the Prime Minister tell us, did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear. Prime Minister.
Yes, it did. As a result, various questions were put to him. I intend to disclose to this House all of the national security, prejudice to international relations on one side. I want to make sure this House sees the full documentation, so it will see for itself the extent to which time and time again Mandelson completely misrepresented the extent of his relationship with Epstein and lied throughout the process, including in response to the due diligence.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is shocking what the Prime Minister has just said. How can he stand up there saying that he knew, but he just asked Peter Mandelson if the security vetting was true or false? This is a man who had been sacked from cabinet twice already for unethical behaviour.
As was observed today on the Low Caesar show, I tuned in live, actually, and caught it for once. I'm usually too busy during the day, but Kemi did a good job of reiterating time and time again, Mandelson was a friend of a paedophile. Jeffrey Epstein was a paedophile. So you knew that a friend of a paedophile continued to be his friend after he was convicted for child sex trafficking, or soliciting prostitution, rather. And you appointed him anyway. So a good job reiterating that. But the most shocking part is not just that Starmer admitted it, but then he tries to hide in procedure. Not just saying that the Met Police have urged me not to discuss all the details of the case, otherwise it would be prejudiced. Bollocks. He did that for Southport as well, and they were just lying to us the whole time. And they admitted in a Home Affairs Select Committee hearing that the, I think it's Chief Constable of Merseyside Police had considered selectively releasing Axel Rudiker-Barner's Christian family background to diffuse criticism away from Muslim communities. So they were being selective about the truth. And then, oh, I forget who it was, but it's a government advisor who said, well, Keir Starmer's just not telling the truth. If he had released the information about Axel Rudiker-Barner's identity, it wouldn't have prejudiced the trial whatsoever. So Starmer is, yet again, falling back on this old excuse. But if you notice his language about the humble statement that he's meant to be releasing, he says that he wanted to include protections in there for privileged conversations around national security and foreign diplomacy, trade. So there's a few reasons to be suspicious of that. One, it allows him to redact at will. So it allows him to cross out the sections that might incriminate him. Two, Peter Mandelson's brief was international diplomacy. It was international trade. He stood behind Trump as Trump was speaking to Starmer on the phone about the UK-US tariff deal. So parts of Mandelson's career while serving as a US diplomat could also be struck out, which is, of course, the key focus of the document. And then there is, of course, the part about when Starmer said discussions between 2 or 3 parties. And given Jeffrey Epstein's connections to former Israeli Prime Minister Barak, his insistence that he didn't work for Mossad, but that Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, his mistress, died because he tried blackmailing Mossad out of like $400 million, so they killed him. And given the personal identities of many people involved, it's not impossible that things that look bad for certain members of the Israeli state could also be redacted for the documents if necessary. I mean, Barak hasn't come out of looking particularly squeaky clean, has he? So it's not impossible there is a third party that is also worried about being implicated in this, that Starmer would like to redact from the documents, rather. And bear in mind, we knew that Starmer knew back in September. It's a bit like the grooming gang scandal, right? It takes decades and decades and decades of build-up. And there's public knowledge. But all it takes is a conflagration of forces to act as a catalyst for it finally piercing the veil, becoming the public conversation as it did around late 2024, early 2025. And part of that is because, of course, Elon Musk purchased X. Now, this story has been known since 2023, since 12th of September 2025, and is now brought to the fore because of the Epstein File revelations. But sources told The Independent back in September of 2025 that MI6 failed to clear Peter Mandelson because of concerns over his business links to China and worries that his past links to Jeffrey Epstein would compromise him. So they thought Peter Mandelson was compromised via his links to Epstein and business connections to China. I've seen some extensive documentation of his trips out to China that I didn't have time to pour through and include in this already quite long stream script. Safe to say, though, isn't the approval of a Chinese mega embassy on Royal Mint property by the Starmer government, despite concerns that they were spying on cabinet ministers of the last government, isn't Starmer's supplicant trip to Beijing to lift sanctions on MPs and lords, to strike some sort of visa and trade deal with the Chinese? Isn't his insistence to sell off the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, meaning the Diego Garcia military base, can then, the Chinese can get a good gander at a UK-US joint military base? Aren't all of these things starting to seem a little bit more explicable with the understanding that Peter Mandelson has been pulling the strings of this Labour government and has significant business interests in China? Doesn't it start to make a bit more sense? It's not just Mandelson that's been compromised by his connections to Epstein. It's Starmer who's been completely compromised by his links to Mandelson and his links to China. And that explains why this government is, as well as ideology, as well as sheer contempt for the native British people, which Starmer displayed today, it explains why this government is insistent on impoverishing us, replacing us, selling us out to the highest bidder. When The Independent put the claims that Keir had pushed through vetting on Lord Mandelson's appointment, despite not clearing MI6 vetting, he pushed through Mandelson's appointment, a spokesperson said, vetting done by FCDO in normal way. As we'll find out soon, that's not true. Mandelson admitted in his vetting interview for the role of US ambassador he had continued his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein for many years, according to reports. Someone has just sent in a £5 super chat correcting my framing. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you for becoming a member. Not selling the Chagos Islands, paying to give them away. True. We will be paying something like £90 billion, because it's subject to inflation, to lease out the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. So we're paying them to take it and allowing the Chinese to spy as long as they like on our military bases. So, correct. Again, the depths of treachery are just unfathomable. And so, we knew about this in September 2025. We also knew about this way back in 2023, June 2023. And that's because this photo of Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein blowing out the candles on a birthday cake was printed. It's because there was a report by JP Morgan in 2019, filed to a New York court, that showed extensive connections between Jeffrey Epstein and the disgraced former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who Faraz Modad, who I've actually never met, but he produces fantastic work. So Faraz, if you ever see this, excellent analyst. We should chat sometime. He pointed out the important thing is that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was serving actually as a trade envoy during the time, and so himself, much like Peter Mandelson, probably would have been privy to information he could have passed on to Epstein, and, well, unlike Mandelson, was more likely to partake in the women that Epstein procured on his island and at his properties, as we've seen in various photos of Andrew, not just standing next to Virginia Defray, who obviously is deceased and a dubious source of information, because she tends to embellish, but also various photos of Andrew on all fours over women with their faces blacked out, presumably because they were victims of some sort that the Trump administration and Department of Justice are trying to protect the identities of as part of a wider probe. That being said, members of the Trump administration seem compromised by their extensive connection to Epstein's networks, and so whether or not we'll get accountability on this, I won't hold my breath. This is one of the reasons why I was reluctant to talk about this subject when the Epstein Files first dropped, is because I felt like I couldn't say anything about the sensationalist claims made in the documents, some of which is not provably true, about George Bush Sr. eating someone's intestines in a ritual sacrifice, or Donald Trump killing multiple people and burying them on lawns on the Trump golf course. Those all seemed outlandish. They weren't substantiated. And also, nothing I could say about them would bring any more accountability than the nothing that was going to come. It's just by pure happenstance that this has fallen on Keir Starmer and actually has some political consequences, especially if we keep talking about it. We keep ratcheting up the pressure. Starmer could be out in the next couple of days. Otherwise, the Epstein Files are going to be inconsequential because so many people are involved and compromised by business connections, by social connections, by sexual compromat material collected by the Epstein network, that it's highly unlikely that they're going to bring this house of cards down on themselves. Just being pessimistic about it. But this should give you a lesson. Never allow sexual reprobates in your inner circle. It's just not worth it. Have just very normal married white guys running everything. That's the Restore Britain approach, and I think they're doing a good job with that. Anyway, this report suggested in June 2009, when Mandelson was the business secretary, he was staying at Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan while Epstein was in prison for soliciting prostitution from a minor. I don't know about you, but I've always managed to resist the urge for a sleepover at the house of a known sex offender. I prize the integrity of my anal virginity far too much, though I don't think that's a concern of Peter Mandelson's. Also, in 2014, Mandelson agreed to be a founding citizen of the Terramar Project, a non-profit ocean conservation group founded by Ghislaine Maxwell that had financial support from Epstein. So remember when Mandelson was saying, these bank statements might be false, I don't think I received money from Epstein. Well, you were part of his network's various groups. So, again, reason for suspicion. Mandelson, incredibly untrustworthy. And because of all this, because we know that Starmer knew in September, because, as Kemi Badmark pointed out, this Financial Times piece was public knowledge circa June 2023, year and a half before Mandelson was appointed as US ambassador, this is why Starmer's hands were shaking throughout the entire PMQs. I caught this, got 2 million views, got played on GB News. But look at it. He's petrified. He knows this could bring him down, and that's why he's grasping his hands and trying to conceal it from view. Starmer knows that this is the scandal that could finish him. It wasn't his anti-corruption minister, Tulip Siddiq, being found guilty of corruption because her aunt was running Bangladesh and got cooed out because she was so hated. There were allegations of political killings and disappearances and embezzlement. So Tulip Siddiq, I think she's got 8 years now sentenced to prison in Bangladesh. It wasn't Angela Rayner failing to pay her council tax on one of her properties and him throwing her under the bus. And don't worry, the Red Queen wants to come back with a vengeance. It wasn't Peter Mandelson being sacked as US ambassador the first time around. Wasn't the Southport killings. It wasn't the Island of Strangers speech and then walking it back. It wasn't any of those. It wasn't the Ukrainian rent boys, by the way. I think a fifth has been arrested now, who is 19, which, as Carl Benjamin pointed out today on the Lotus Eaters podcast, makes one wonder as to whether or not Mandelson had anything compromising on Starmer himself, because I don't know about you, but Ukrainian models aren't firebombing my front door. Apparently Ukrainian modelling agencies were also mentioned in the Epstein Files. Very conspicuous. And this chap, I think the one they just arrested, was 19, right? Well, given Keir Starmer is staying at number 10 Downing Street, and has been for the last couple of years, if Starmer knew the chap, that would have made him 17, right? Perhaps even younger. Very, very concerning. Someone has suggested that Starmer is a cockroach backed by Blair. He'll cling on for now. I don't think so. And the reason is, you don't get Labour MPs coming out and declaring that Starmer should go unless they feel comfortable to keep their jobs to do so. Because remember, Starmer is ruthless. He will withdraw the whip. He did so over the welfare reform bill defeat. He withdrew the whip from a number of Labour MPs. He banished Zara Sultana, didn't he? He kicked Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour Party. He's made a hell of a lot of enemies on the Labour left. And so unless they feel sufficiently safe to call for his resignation, they won't do it. And the fact that Starmer is shaking there knows that he's lost a lot of his support. Don't forget as well, Blair is currently backing Shabana Mahmood. That's why Mahmood was the guest of honour at the Tony Blair Institute's Christmas event, the irony, which is where she said she wanted the UK to become a digital panopticon, presumably powered by Blair's friend Larry Ellison of Oracle. And Mahmoud has stayed quiet throughout this entire thing. She has instead been giving, I think it's to the Home Affairs Select Committee, testimony about her immigration reforms. The government's undergoing a consultation about her ILR extensions right now, and she's trying to position herself as an immigration hardliner, and there's apparently a backbench revolt brewing among some of the Labour progressives against the immigration reforms. So she is trying to position herself as the sensible alternative, someone who can do God, unlike Alistair Campbell had said in the Blair years. Which God? Unfortunately. So she is trying to position herself as the brand-safe Blair pick to succeed Starmer. There is no natural constituency for Keir Starmer at the moment, and that handshake shows that he knows it. So, Starmer has then come out today and gone with the line insisting that Peter Mandelson lied to me. I was betrayed. I'm actually the real victim here. I took the Prince of Darkness at his word. I took the man who had befriended the world's most notorious paedophile after and during he was in prison for soliciting prostitution of a child. I took him at his word. So that makes you, Keir, retarded at best and an evil liar at worst. Let's just listen to his prattling here.
And when, later, further information came to light, he was asked whether he had accepted gifts and hospitality, about whether he had been fully transparent about the relationship. The information now available makes clear that the answers he gave were lies. Such deceit is incompatible with public service. Let me be clear, no one is above accountability. And no one, however well connected, however experienced, however senior, should hold public office if they cannot meet the basic test of honesty.
You knew he was friends with a paedophile when you appointed him US ambassador. When, for example, you were introducing him in speeches like this.
Already I can feel there's a real buzz around Washington right now. You can sense that there's a new leader in town, that he's a true one-off, a pioneer in business and in politics. Many people love him. Others love to hate him. But to us, he's just Peter.
Look at that smug fucking face. Hey, I'm best friends with a man who was best friends with the world's most famous paedophile. So Starmer's faux outrage, his confected shock and horror at being betrayed by Mandelson, despite us all knowing that he knew that Mandelson had maintained a friendship with Epstein after he was convicted for soliciting prostitution of a child, and then admitting yesterday at PMQs that he then knew before the appointment. He then expects us to believe that he is remorseful, that he never saw this coming, that this demands Starmer acting as a man of integrity to prevent this from ever happening again. That we can trust him. Nope, not going to happen. And then, and this is how you know he's properly desperate, right? This is now how you know he feels under fire from all sides. He used most of the speech to talk about the Gorton and Denton by-election, Reform UK, Robert Jenrick, and Matt Goodwin. And, get a load of this, the online social media grievance industrial complex of podcasters and X-accounts sharing clips of British cities with their UK aesthetics, pointing out successive governments' failure on immigration and non-existence of integration. Small story. I was in a pub about a year and a half ago now with some friends of the channel. This was Lewis Brackpool, Harrison Pitt, Charlie Downs, and me. And late in the evening, Wes Streeting walks in. It was a silver cross right by Trafalgar Square, not far from Downing Street in Parliament. He walks in, strutting around like a pigeon, takes one look at us, locks eyes with me, and glares. Full-on glares. Then disappears to the toilet, probably not alone, walks back, and does a drive-by glare as he goes to find a seat. Now, at the time, I thought, must be his type. But I now wonder, considering there is a Cabinet Office department that keeps tabs on all of us posters, ladies and gents, considering Shabana Mahmood said in her Labour Party conference speech that she's worried about the rise of pernicious ethno-nationalism that says she, a Pakistani woman, can't be English. Considering Keir Starmer apparently has online posters living rent-free in his head because we keep ratioing whichever wretched intern runs his X account. I wonder if we're all notorious. I'm sure Lander and World by Wolf and Group at Low, etc. will be watching this stream. I think we're driving the government mad, ladies and gents. I think Carl and Count Dankula are just terrorizing them in their dreams. Well, Keir Starmer doesn't dream, he's already said that, but if he could dream, if he could rotate a ratio in his mind, I'm sure it would be one of mine. Anyway, let's listen to him tilt at the phantoms of the 20th century, swing wildly at far-right windmills while he's about to be chucked out by his own party.
You see it in the industrialised grievance factory, in parts of social media. Miserable video after miserable video telling you that entire cities and towns, the great communities of this country, are wastelands, no-go zones. And worse, selling the lie, defied every day by millions of people in this country, that people who look different cannot really live together. I reject that completely. And you see it in politicians, like the Reform candidate for Gorton and Denton, who look at people like Rishi Sunak, Shabana Mahmood, and presumably Marcus Rashford, Shirley Bassey, Anna Sala, and say they can't really be English or Welsh or Scottish because they are not white.
That's true. That's true. They don't have any native ancestry. Now, you can be a shade or two darker than my complexion and still be English if you have at least one English parent. I mean, Ben Habib is half English, half Pakistani, for example. And he's made his home here, and I think you can count him as a patriot. But none of those people have English ancestry. And my identity, my heritage, my ethnicity, my nation, is not your cosplay. It is not boiled down to a set of British values that Keir Starmer thinks he is defending, while proactively weaponising imported ethnic and religious communities against the indigenous people. He declares that if you don't like your country being flooded by foreigners, you are the enemy. He is going to fight you. And his victory over you, dispossessing you of your country, is national renewal, according to his September Labour Party conference speech, the last one he'll ever give. Anyway, we'll let him finish prattling on in this insufferable Squidward-esque voice.
An affront to British values as I see them. And I tell you, as long as I've got breath in my body, I will always fight against that politics. And on that, honestly, I never thought I would see the day when the Conservative Party would tolerate, for months, a man who went to Birmingham and said that the city had failed at integration because he didn't see enough white faces. That is a disgrace, and he should have been sacked months ago.
Based Robert Jamrick. Someone for £5 has sent a super chat in. Question I would ask him is, Does he think Russians can become English just because they're mostly white? My friend Harrison Pitt put it this way on our former show, Deprogrammed, RIP, where he said, for all of the bellicosity in the pages of The Times by One Nation Tories, or from Keir Starmer and the Liberal Democrats, if the Wagner Group boarded one of those Channel vessels, rocked up at Dover Beach, and insisted they were as British as you and me, that they should be afforded asylum housing, spending money, DJ lessons if they were lucky enough to be given a hotel in Croydon, would then they become as indistinguishably English as anyone else? And would they not be considered an invasion force? Because they're actual Russian mercenaries. It's not about consistency, it's just... Wokeness is now just a unified field theory of how everything is white people's fault, thereby the justification for replacing them and dispossessing them of their own country. So, it's not about consistency. And also, it's important to note, by the way, this is a side point, anyone who uses the phrase British values is then engaged in a debate with demented progressives who can claim to be more authentically fulfilling those values than you. So never engage in the argument that your identity is a result of propositional values. Because you can be defined out of your identity by someone who seeks to dispossess you of it. Instead, your identity is something concrete, it is something inherited, it is a product of parentage, of lineage, of ancestry, of families, of named individuals in that place over time who built that country, and to their descendants, that country belongs. So, anyone on the ostensible right who is talking about civic nationalism or British values is an idiot or an enemy. I'll be working on a video about a definition of nationalism coming soon. I've been reading some books on it. It's just contemporary political events seem to take precedent. But civic nationalism? Non-starter. Anyway, the other point that he made in this speech, and remember, this is the speech where he's meant to be repentant for appointing the best friend of a paedophile to be the US ambassador. The same man that sold secrets to said paedophile and seems to have received payments from him. He then defined being British as to be tolerant, reasonable, compassionate, and diverse, which means that to be British, you have to not be British, because diverse just means non-white. Diverse means not indigenous. Diverse means an immigrant client group that the state, the Liberal Leviathan, the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, can weaponise against the indigenous population who would actually quite like to possess their country rather than have it subjected to the egalitarian, utopian, social experiments of Fabian socialists.
My message is that every minute we spend talking about anything other than the cost of living, pride in place, how we stabilise our economy, and how we make the massive argument that we need to make, the argument of our time, that we must unite this country, understand that to be British is to be tolerant, reasonable, compassionate, and diverse, and fight for it against the toxic division of reform. Every minute we spend not talking and focusing on that is an absolute minute wasted.
The irony is that Danny Kruger agrees with him. Also, I found it very funny that Tommy Robinson came out and now endorsed Danny Kruger. Masterful trolling. Point being, Keir Starmer felt the need to emphasise diverse. That's what he really believes. He believes that to be British is to be foreign. There may be reasons, which we will discuss in an uncomfortable portion at the end of this show, but nevertheless, we press on. So, Peter Mandelson, you may be wondering why Keir Starmer made him so central to his network. Well, Mandelson is an integral node to the broader nexus of the Labour Party under Blair, under Brown, now under Starmer. And he is a shrewd operator involved in various political machinations to repossess the Labour Party after the aberration of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. And this is a graph done by The Times documenting his connections to various ministers, Labour MPs, figures within the party. So we see here that there's Pat McFadden, and it says that he is the Work and Pension Secretary, Mandelson's deputy while he was Business Secretary. McFadden's wife is actually McSweeney's deputy. That's Mariana McFadden, and apparently his desk was right next to Morgan McSweeney's desk in Labour HQ during the election campaign. Lammy was also, by the way, Lord Mandelson's deputy. And then there's Georgia Gould, who is a Labour MP and a schools minister. Georgia Gould is part of the Labour Jewish movement. We'll get onto that later. Gould used to work at the Tony Blair Faith Foundation and is the daughter of two life peers, so yet again part of the Labour nepotism network. Lucy Powell is very much the same. Rachel Reeves' sister is also a Labour MP, so a lot of nepotism going on in the Labour Party. Gould is also married to Lex Zatman, who is previously a special advisor to Liz Kendall, and Morgan McSweeney ran Liz Kendall's unsuccessful Labour leadership bid back in 2015 when she was beaten by Jeremy Corbyn. Morgan McSweeney, however, is very closely tied to Peter Mandelson. And this has been detailed by a series of pieces. The most damning, I believe, is this one in the New Statesman that came out just the other day. And this details how Peter Mandelson became appointed US ambassador. When Starmer first entered Downing Street, appointing Mandelson as ambassador wasn't part of the plan. Sue Gray, who was the Whitehall Mandarin who oversaw the Partygate investigation, if you remember correctly. Keir Starmer famous for having a beer and a curry, as recorded by Fleur Meston. Fleur's done some really uncredited, excellent investigative work, so good on her. But he wasn't scolded for it, he wasn't reprimanded. Instead, Boris Johnson was chucked out, rather than for the Boris wave, rather than for COVID lockdowns and suggesting that COVID vaccines should be mandatory. It was initially for Partygate, and then the final thing that clinched it, remember, was the Chris Pincher affair, where Boris joked, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature, knowing that he was one of many sexual reprobates in the Tory party at the time. We're getting similar vibes here from Starmer, I think. Anyway, Sue Gray was Starmer's chief of staff. Her son is also a Labour MP. Again, more nepotism. She had compiled a shortlist of 2 people as US ambassador, and Mandelson wasn't on it. Keir doesn't even like him and never really has, one Labour insider now insists. He's not Keir's sort of person. True or not, the shortlist Gray had drawn up contained the existing post holder Karen Pierce, who I believe Steve Edgington had a fallout with, and was the reason, because Steve Edgington did some reporting on the US ambassador, and Steve Edgington was then spied on by the UK security services. So Steve Edgington is one of these other lads in the space who's unbelievably politically sound and does some great work, so make sure you're all supporting Steve. Anyway, the other potential appointment was David Miliband, Ed Miliband's brother, the man who was meant to be Labour leader instead. And yet 5 months later, the man Starmer apparently never liked got the job. Well, how did that happen? Turns out it was because of Morgan McSweeney, who is credited for winning Keir Starmer the election. If you're not familiar with Morgan McSweeney, we'll go through his career history, his conspicuous career history, in a moment. When McSweeney arrived in number 10 after years of fighting to lead the Labour Party back to power, he was lost. He was engaged in a bitter feud with Sue Gray, but it was a battle he was ill-equipped to fight. So, for help, he turned, as he very often did, to Peter Mandelson, his mentor. As one person who worked with McSweeney in opposition put it, Morgan McSweeney wouldn't breathe without consulting Mandelson first. They talked all the time, observed another. Mandelson was a frequent visitor to McSweeney's home in rural Scotland. The once close pair have not seen each other since Mandelson's sacking, according to 2 people familiar with the matter, and are no longer in regular contact. In the feud with Sue Gray, Mandelson was instrumental. One person close to the matter says he helped McSweeney navigate it, advising him to build a strategic alliance with Simon Case, the cabinet secretary thought to be a rival of Gray's. Soon, after damaging leaks surrounding Gray's salary and a furore over donations from Lord Wahid Ali, another conspicuous friend buying Keir Starmer clothes and allowing Keir Starmer to stay at his flat, after those revelations, Sue was ousted by Starmer and replaced by McSweeney. One wonders if Mandelson was involved in the machinations, the press briefings, the leaks that led to McSweeney's appointment. A new shortlist was then drawn up, comprised of 4 diplomats and 2 political figures: George Osborne, the former Conservative Chancellor, and Lord Mandelson. Intriguingly, Starmer originally favoured Osborne, but McSweeney took a different view. According to those in the room with him at the time, he viewed Mandelson's slick personal manner, skills as a political operator, and experience as the EU's trade negotiator as appropriate for the job. The Cabinet Office Proprietary and Ethics team then compiled due diligence reports on each of the 6 contenders up for consideration, and the report on Mandelson warned of potential conflicts of interest surrounding Global Counsel, the lobbying company Mandelson co-founded, in which he had a 28% stake, worth about £8.5 million, because it highlighted the company's clients, in particular Russian and Chinese businessmen. Were any of these Russian connections procured via Jeffrey Epstein? We don't know. But it certainly makes Keir Starmer's supplication of the Chinese in the last year very conspicuous, doesn't it? The report detailed Mandelson's previous resignations, and then there was a section on Epstein. Sources familiar with the report confirm it clearly stated Mandelson's relationship with a paedophile continued after his conviction for soliciting a minor for prostitution. We know this. He stayed at the apartment. We know this from the Epstein Files emails and text leaks. He was talking all the time. He wanted to celebrate his release from prison. Damning. It contained links to photographs of Mandelson with the paedophile, presumably the publicly available photographs, including the one printed in the Financial Times in 2023, and drew particular attention to evidence that Mandelson had stayed at Epstein's apartment while he was in prison. It was sent directly to the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer saw this. He saw the photographs. He knew Mandelson was staying at Epstein's apartment. He knew they remained friends. He was warned that Mandelson had been compromised by his associations to Epstein and his business links, and he proceeded to appoint him anyway, on the advice of Morgan McSweeney. The Cabinet Secretary, Chris Wormwald, was asked about the report in November and told MPs that it contained a summary of reputational risks associated with appointing Mandelson, including his prior relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Yet, Morgan McSweeney was relaxed when he saw the report, according to one person who observed him at the time, because the Chief of Staff said Labour had already broached a conversation with Mandelson about these issues before. They had taken Mandelson's word for it. Now, apparently someone in number 10 disputes this characterization, but we'll hear more from number 10 in a bit. Mandelson lied in his responses, a Downing Street source says, including denying he had stayed at Epstein's flat. I was asked 3 questions which I truthfully answered, Mandelson said to the New Statesman. But Starmer knew he stayed at the flat. Like, it was factual. It was in the JP Morgan report from 2019 that was then published by the Financial Times in 2023. They asked him about it. Starmer said he asked him about it at PMQs the other day. Starmer took the word of Mandelson over the intelligence services and the advice of Morgan McSweeney, to whom he credits his election victory. And McSweeney's role in the broader Labour network is, again, very conspicuous, as is Mandelson's. So it seems that Mandelson and McSweeney peddled so much influence that Starmer appointed him despite concerns. And it says, McSweeney has long been the lightning rod for the frustrations many in Labour feel towards this leadership. Blamed for a boys' club culture, brute factionalism, the purging of the party left and Corbyn loyalists from the party, Keir Starmer's relentless Stalinist approach to wresting control of the party back from Momentum and the Corbynites, and a disrespect for the party's elected politicians, including, as we'll see, helping draw up shortlists for candidates with Mandelson ahead of the 2024 election, which is why we had that mini controversy for a little while with Diane Abbott being denied a seat and then Keir Starmer saying, of course we'll allow Diane Abbott to stand. We couldn't possibly be racist to a black woman, and Jeremy Corbyn's ex-girlfriend. Now, as his advice to appoint Mandelson brings shame on Starmer's already shaky government, Labour figures are still asking, why is the PM still listening to Morgan McSweeney? In fact, many Labour politicians, according to Dan Hodges, who is the son of a Labour MP, who is friends with the people at Hope Not Hate, who still works for the Mail, writing about Labour affairs, so well situated to know this. He says he understands senior Labour ministers have told Keir Starmer that Morgan McSweeney needs to go if he wants to save his premiership, and that was last night. Too late already. Apparently, someone was briefing Labour ministers saying, you should do what Sajid Javid, etc. did, and resign, triggering a cascade of resignations to prompt Keir Starmer to go, to make his position untenable. So the ministers are already saying, sack Morgan McSweeney or I'm going to walk. The fact that Starmer hasn't sacked Morgan McSweeney means they're both going. And to be honest, he's already sacked Mandelson. if he sacks McSweeney, it'll be a lot like when Liz sacked Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor. You only throw someone to the crocodiles in the hopes that they take so long to eat your sacrifice that you find a way to escape, and very often it just makes the crocodiles even hungrier, I'm afraid. So who is Morgan McSweeney? This is a very good article from the BBC, and it's not often I say that. So, McSweeney is a senior advisor to Keir Starmer, credited for Starmer's 2024 Loveless landslide, and he has often been blamed by the Labour left for the harder rhetoric on immigration or the attempt to win over the centre and the right, the tack back to Blairism. He's kind of a bogeyman in the mind of the Corbynites. McSweeney derives his power and influence from his track record as a political strategist. He masterminded Labour's landslide in 2024 and Keir Starmer's 2020 leadership bid, so Keir relies on McSweeney for his victories. His closeness to Keir, as a seasoned political operator, to a relatively inexperienced Prime Minister, means he can be seen as a proxy for the PM, and as we see, he is also a proxy for Peter Mandelson. McSweeney was born in County Cork, in Ireland. He then moved to London as a teenager, initially working on building sites before winning a place at the London School of Economics, the LSE, where the Fabian Society was founded. According to the book Get In, authored by Maguire and Pogrund, he dropped out and went to live in an Israeli kibbutz for 6 months. That's weird. Morgan McSweeney's not Jewish. He's Irish. Why did he go and live in an Israeli kibbutz for 6 months? Like, okay, maybe he just wanted to go and see the country. But given his nesting in the broader Jewish Labour movement, which is how Keir Starmer won power, promising to bring back normalcy and the politics of respect to the party, which was essentially code for purging the Corbynites under the banner of ridding the party of anti-Semitism. And it's not like there weren't legitimate concerns about that in the party. Given his situation in that broader network, raises questions. Again, Peter Mandelson himself is Jewish. His father, involved in specifically Jewish media, not all the media, ladies and gentlemen. His grandfather founded a synagogue. Keir Starmer's wife is Jewish. Lots of his friends are Jewish human rights lawyers like Philippe Sands and the Attorney General, Lord Hermer. What we're seeing here, not to presage the conclusion, is people not being quite so noble as the cause they purport to represent, and that cause being the way in which they get back into power, namely fighting anti-Semitism. Anyway, after living in the Israeli kibbutz, he returned to London to study at Middlesex University with a degree in politics and marketing. McSweeney then joined Labour under Tony Blair, working in a junior role at the party's headquarters. He then started working for Steve Reed, who is now the Housing Secretary, whose name will come up very soon. Because Steve Reed has been doing the ministerial rounds today, going and defending Keir Starmer. When Reed was councillor in Lambeth in South London, and when he was trying to regain control of the party from the hard left. In 2006, McSweeney helped run the party's successful campaign to take control of the council, with Reed becoming leader. His reputation as a skilled campaign strategist was further cemented in Barking and Dagenham, again, noteworthy, where the British National Party was gaining support and hoping to win its first parliamentary seat in 2010. Morgan McSweeney helped Margaret Hodge, again, part of the Jewish Labour network, to win her seat in Barking and Dagenham. Barking and Dagenham was the seat being targeted by Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate, friends with Lord Hermer, back from the Searchlight days, supervised by Jerry Gable, again, ethnically Jewish communist, and Lord Hermer and Nick Lowles remain friends, and Morgan McSweeney, in the early days of Keir Starmer's tenure as Prime Minister, invited Nick Lowles to Downing Street. Also, as we'll see later, Baroness Ruth Smith, who sat on Hope Not Hate's board, influential Labour peer, member of Israeli-British transatlantic groups, and member of the Jewish Labour movement, who helped bring down Jeremy Corbyn with accusations of anti-Semitism after she faced some quite visceral verbal abuse and intimidation by party activists. So again, it's not like there weren't grounds to accuse Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters of sympathy for Hamas and Hezbollah, and hostility to Jewish people in general, not just objections to Israel's foreign policy. But it's also clear that McSweeney, Mandelson, Starmer, his government, were well within the side of the Jewish Labour movement, who were very much against Corbyn, and that movement is one of the reasons why Keir Starmer has become Prime Minister. And so, if Peter Mandelson is part of that, and is only one step removed from Jeffrey Epstein, it raises some very uncomfortable questions that shouldn't be a cause to blame every Jewish person. But there are clearly people who use their Jewish identity in politics as cover for their treasonous activity, in the case of Peter Mandelson, or their demented politics. It's kind of a deflector shield to rid them of criticism for their insane ideological Fabian socialism, or just being perverts, as we see with the Jewish chap who was a director at a London synagogue, who was employed by Hope Not Hate, who is a convicted paedophile, Labour councillor, very recent. There's just a lot of paedophiles orbiting Labour these days, just very, very conspicuous. Anyway, McSweeney then played a key role to defeat the BNP in the area. His campaigns were not always a success, though. As it says, in 2015, he ran Liz Kendall's bid to become Labour leader, which secured only 4.5% of the votes, and was beaten by Jeremy Corbyn. In 2017, McSweeney became a director of think tank Labour Together, which opposed the direction of the party under Corbyn, and went on to back Keir Starmer. The Electoral Commission fined Labour Together £14,250 for late and inaccurate reporting of donations during the period when McSweeney was a director. The fine later fueled calls from Conservative MPs for a deeper investigation into Labour finances, though the Electoral Commission decided not to open an investigation, which is very strange. At the same time, McSweeney left Labour Together to run Keir Starmer's 2020 leadership bid, later becoming his chief of staff in opposition, where he played a key role in removing Corbyn supporters from positions of power. This was the cull of John McDonnell and Rebecca Long-Bailey and Diane Abbott and Zara Sultana. The Times reported it was here that he masterminded what became Starmer's 3-year plan, detoxifying the party, beating allegations of anti-Semitism, becoming an effective opposition to the Conservatives on crime, defence and the economy in order to win power. As Labour's campaign director, McSweeney was tasked with devising the party's strategy for last July's general election, including Labour's selection process for parliamentary candidates, which he did not do alone, which saw left-wing figures sidelined, caused rows of the trade union movement, and selected various Labour candidates on the grounds of nepotism, like Georgia Gould, like Sue Gray's son, and like his own wife, Imogen Walker, a former councillor in Lambeth, who now represents Hamilton and Clyde Valley, and has been going to events with Peter Mandelson. So, Guido Fawkes reported that Morgan McSweeney pushed through the civil service, through the intelligence agencies, to get Mandelson to become US ambassador. Insiders say he dedicated lots of his time to meetings in the Cabinet Office and FCDO to that effect. And there was a conversation shortly after Mandelson was sacked that was published in the Daily Mail. This is from Dan Hodges. Again, someone who knows the intimate details of the Starmer bunker. I mean, I know Carl uses that phrase a lot. Starmer, with his hands shaking, sort of arguing against the phantoms of the online right, the toxicity of reform. It really is like he's moving around phantom tank divisions and fighting a war that has already been lost while the Allies and the Russians encroach onto Berlin. It's just demented. But anyway, Mandelson and Sweeney have long been close, according to this conversation, according to this article. Mandelson once said, "I don't know who and how and when Sweeney was invented, but whoever was responsible, they'll find their place in heaven." Well, I think heaven is a lot lower and warmer than any of these men expected, but I'm sure they'll be seeing their old pal Jeffrey Epstein down there. According to senior diplomatic sources, the Foreign Office was largely cut out of the selection process while McSweeney pushed for Mandelson to be ambassador. This extended to Lord Mandelson's security vetting. According to a senior source, because Mandelson wasn't a career civil servant, he didn't go through the traditional vetting processes. McSweeney, who Starmer then stood up to defend, at the same time he was batting away allegations that he had acted improperly over Mandelson's appointment, was the reason why Mandelson was supposedly not subjected to the scrutiny of the traditional vetting processes that Starmer is now saying acquit him of wrongdoing for appointing Mandelson. So Starmer is defending Morgan McSweeney and refuses to sack him, but he is the reason that apparently these processes failed rather than Starmer's judgment failing. It's a completely untenable position for Starmer, and he won't sack McSweeney, as far as we know. So he's caught in a lie, and he's going to go. Normally, an ambassador would have been subjected to detailed security assessment at the time of their appointment and altogether additional regular vetting every 4 or 5 years, but this didn't apply in this case, said the source. The sources say the security services produced a single report on any potential issues raised by Lord Mandelson's appointment. After sharing information with their opposite numbers in the US State Department, a number of red flags were raised. Officers had a number of concerns, a source revealed. Epstein was one, but there were also issues relating to some of Mandelson's business links with Russia and China. This, by the way, was the message that Lord Mandelson wrote in Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book. But wherever he is in the world, he remains my best pal. Keir Starmer thought it was a great idea appointing the best friend of a notorious nonce to be the US ambassador, and thought this wouldn't sink his career. So you must ask, is it Starmer's poor judgment? Was he really lied to by Mandelson and McSweeney? Because it doesn't seem like it. Or what does Mandelson have on Starmer that means that Morgan McSweeney needs to stay in place and Mandelson got what he wanted? Very conspicuous. Anyway, it also turns out that Mandelson was responsible for picking the candidates for the 2024 election. He worked with McSweeney to do this using a Google Doc. A Labour Party spokesperson said Mandelson had no role in official candidate selection, but the iPaper understands that he had access to a spreadsheet that was off the books and was an exercise conducted amid the power struggles within the party, with McSweeney, the Corbynites, Sue Gray, etc. Apparently, it was a Google document. It dates from the years before the candidates were selected to stand for the Labour Party in the 2024 election. It allowed live sharing and comments from participants about whether people in the wider Labour government would be suitable to stand for Parliament, to weed out any with hard left views, or would otherwise be unsuitable. The comments included whether people had done something in the Corbyn era, or where they stood on policy positions, the Labour source told the iPaper. So this revelation is going to further brew a backbench revolt, because there are still people that are sympathetic to Corbyn's opinions, but who held their tongue on Starmer's leadership because they knew it was the only route back into power. But now they see Keir Starmer being the most unpopular Prime Minister on record. They see him alienating the backbenchers and the labour unions, climbing down on things like welfare reform and the inheritance tax rate on farms. They have pissed off their base with their attempt to reach a compromise between reform and open borders on immigration. And even though they're not actually solving the problem of the small boats, of asylum claims, of mass migration, they're handing out citizenship grants like participation trophies, but they're still seen as too restrictive by their base, especially when Stella Creasy, my arch-nemesis, is writing in The Guardian that Mahmood is basically constructing British ICE. So they have no constituencies, no supporters, and now best friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Mandelson, has been laundering his opinions through Morgan McSweeney to Keir Starmer and controlling who the candidates are. So it all looks very corrupt, very nepotistic, and therefore one must have to wonder what other forces were at play in selecting these candidates. Because if Mandelson, while he's working for Brown, was taking advice from Jeffrey Epstein, now that Epstein's dead, who else is Mandelson taking advice from? Why have the police not arrested him and seized his devices yet? By the way, Mandelson, still just free at home. Because the Times has done an interview with him. Don't worry, we'll be getting to that. Momentum, the socialist pressure group, asked how many Labour MPs were handpicked by Jeffrey Epstein's best pal. Keir Starmer owes the Labour movement and the British public an answer. Hard to disagree with the Momentum here. Again, the knives are out. It's not just the Corbynite faction that are calling for Starmer to go. But it turns out that Mandelson still has some admirers, some friends, some apologists who are just sort of softly walking back their long association with him. So Danny Finkelstein, ever a bastion of prudent political acumen, isn't he, ladies and gentlemen? We're on our weekly Finkelstein watch. He wrote the following article, "A personal tragedy but a jaw-dropping scandal." I actually don't think that Peter Mandelson's decades-long friendship with the world's most famous paedophile is a personal tragedy, Danny. I think it's absolutely abhorrent. I don't think it's a personal tragedy that Keir Starmer appointed him as the US ambassador. I think it means that our government is fundamentally compromised by foreign intelligence agencies, an international network of financiers who have a very low opinion of white people and call them goyim. Potentially, other business interests in China and Russia. And just corruption by the worst kinds of reprobates imaginable. I don't think it's a tragedy, I think it's a crime, Danny. Nevertheless, Danny regales us with the story about how he recorded a podcast with Peter Mandelson, how he's so charming, a larger-than-life figure. "I found him likeable, though not without realising why some others don't feel the same way," Danny says in his insightful column. "We had a good working relationship. When he stopped to become Britain's ambassador to the United States, I missed seeing him." You know, I happen to think that anyone who continues to write favourably about the best friend of the world's most infamous paedophile is probably contaminated by some degree. By, at the very least, your poor judgment of character. Peter Mandelson was and remains one of the most important transformative figures of modern British politics. This contribution will be remembered, but never now without its mention of his disastrous entanglement with Epstein. A tragedy. No, it's not tragic, Danny. It's disgusting. There's a big difference. There's nothing tragic about it. I don't think, actually, Mandelson was ever noble. He always seems to have been a self-interested, deeply ideological, sexual pervert who has sold out state secrets to Jeffrey Epstein, seems to have taken money from him, and was friends with him and stayed at his place, despite knowing that he was a paedophile. Don't think there's a hint of tragedy about this. This doesn't quite meet the bar of Romeo and Juliet, Danny. Anyway, another fan of Danny Finkelstein's is Mr. Michael Gove. Michael Gove wrote, "Peter Mandelson is the best choice to handle Donald Trump." So, implicitly siding with Mandelson against Trump. Remember, by the way, Gove endorsed Kamala Harris in the US presidential election. It was the first thing he did as Spectator editor. A lot of egg on his face now. That's why some of his friends are trying to make things up with the administration with things like, Spectator US, Unheard US, appointing Sohrab Ahmari as the editor of Unheard US, developing GB News America. Suella Braverman pointed out that the Spectator forgot to mention this particular misjudgment in their recent podcast of Coffee House Shots covering the scandal, and Michael Gove goes, "Fair point by Suella, my misjudgment." However, about 4 weeks ago, Michael Gove, in his wisdom as Spectator editor, allowed Peter Mandelson to write a piece on President Trump invading Greenland. Now, I think, funnily enough, the fact that Peter Mandelson had already been sacked for being friends with Jeffrey Epstein is a more important thing to focus on than his opinion on what Trump says about Greenland. And if we're just keeping track, Michael Gove thinks it's worthwhile publishing Peter Mandelson in The Spectator, going so far as to promote his article as a must-read piece, an exclusive, worth buying The Spectator for. So Peter Mandelson, disgraced former Blairite politician, sacked for being US ambassador, best friend to Jeffrey Epstein, is A-OK for The Spectator, as is Bonnie Blue. But me, a young man concerned about immigration, no, I'm banned. I'm banned from the physical fucking premises of Unheard Cafe. Peter Mandelson, after everything about his friendship with Epstein had come out, just before the Epstein Files dropped, just fine to publish. I'm starting to feel okay about being banned from The Spectator. This is the kind of people they think are sensible to publish. Kind of people that are opposed to this sort of thing, of course, is the indomitable Rupert Lowe, who correctly pointed out in Parliament that we have Elon Musk to thank for this. Musk seems to have been too much of a spurg to understand the code that Epstein was speaking in when he was inviting him to business meetings on the island, and he didn't know the nature of the parties being conducted on the island, and he didn't quite understand the sort of Pizzagate-esque signs and symbols that Epstein was throwing out to him. It's a spurg after our own hearts, I suppose, but Rupert Lowe points out that if it weren't for Elon Musk's X, we wouldn't be publishing these emails. We wouldn't have had the pressure put on the Trump administration in the first place to release the documents, and so we wouldn't have had the casus belli to finally get rid of Keir Starmer. And when Rupert Lowe says this, he's heckled by Labour MPs. And the reason is, of course, most of them are NPCs, and they just hear Elon Musk and boo and hiss. But it's because they're petrified of being exposed themselves. Whether it's for incompetence, or ideological rot, political corruption, or perhaps sexual perversion. Let's take a listen.
We all owe a great vote of thanks and gratitude to Elon Musk and X, who has played his part in exposing a great deal of this evil.
You got Lib Dems, Labour heckling him. Isn't it interesting how Rupert Lowe is the only person who isn't afraid of being exposed for something? All I'm saying is, ladies and gentlemen, pick your champions wisely. So, Labour Party decided to deploy their ministers on the media rounds to defend this, and the person who went on the media rounds this morning was Steve Reed. Now, if you remember earlier when we were talking about Morgan McSweeney, McSweeney was working for Reed while Reed was a councillor in 2006. Reed has been continually promoted in this government. He took over the role of Minister for Housing and Local Communities after Angela Rayner was sacked. Reed is overseeing the Islamophobia definition that the government are insisting on drafting. It's like their pet project. Reed is the one who has come out with the automaton line that Starmer knew nothing, even though he's already admitted to knowing that Mandelson was friends with Epstein before appointing him US ambassador. So Reed is desperate to defend the Starmer, Mandelson and McSweeney project. All of these people are in cahoots. They are only there because of that project, masterminded by Mandelson and Blair, of course. They all know that if Starmer goes down, they go down with him. That's why he's red in the face. That's why he's shouting. I would play this clip, but Good Morning Britain are notorious for copyright striking things, even if you use it in the form of fair use. So you'll just have to allow the wordless body language to do the speaking for it. But of course, what they can't excuse, and which is why the public are so furious about this, is that whether or not Starmer felt lied to by Peter Mandelson, one, he took Mandelson's word for it, despite him being the Prince of Darkness, sacked from multiple jobs before. I sounded like David Bowie from Labyrinth when I did that, didn't I? Nothing. But is his friendship with Epstein not the reason to not appoint him in the first place? And of course, Steve Reed can't say yes, because by being associated with McSweeney and Starmer, he's compromised too. These are just pathetic. Then we have the wonderful Wes Streeting, the man who stared me down, Brutus in waiting, who was hoping to take over from Keir Starmer. Problem for Wes is that he attempts to defend Starmer as not knowing, but Wes has personal and professional ties to Peter Mandelson that run potentially as deep as Starmer's, so you can just watch him squirm like a worm on a hook, realising that his leadership bid has just gone kaput for this scandal.
I think all of us who thought we knew Peter Mandelson regret ever having known him. I think I cannot emphasise enough how angry and bitterly betrayed people, not just in the government, but across the Labour Party feel, because it's a betrayal of values.
But you stood by him, you sort of defended him last year when we already knew that he had a close friendship with Epstein. Do you now regret that?
Well, when Peter Mandelson was appointed as US ambassador, it was on the basis that he'd served successfully as this country's business secretary, that he had served as an EU trade commissioner. People thought he'd done those roles successfully. He'd been prominent in the media as a broadcaster, writing in newspapers. You're right, there had been some scrutiny of the Epstein relationship in the media, but he was continued to be given that platform and respectability. And further to that, during the vetting process for the appointment of the US ambassador, of course, he was asked about this and this was looked at. The reason the Prime Minister fired him is because the assurances the Prime Minister was given in that respect turned out to be false assurances. So the Prime Minister sacked him without hesitation. And now we know that as well as betraying Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer's trust as Prime Minister, we now learn that Peter Mandelson betrayed Gordon Brown. And Gordon Brown's trust as Prime Minister too.
You were supportive of him becoming US ambassador. Are you confident that there won't be any embarrassing details or documents that emerge as we learn more about that vetting process, about you?
Well, I wasn't involved in the vetting process. There was a vetting process, and the Prime Minister is opting for transparency to reassure people about that process. There are obvious exceptions in terms of any information that might compromise our national security or international relationships. I think people will understand those reasonable exceptions. But beyond that, the Prime Minister is opting for maximum transparency because the Prime Minister has every right to feel angry for the way that Peter Mandelson has let him and the rest of us down. The Prime Minister was given false assurances upon Peter Mandelson's appointment as US ambassador. And the Prime Minister is absolutely determined to strip Peter Mandelson of all of his titles and status that were given to him because of public service, because we now know that an awful lot that was going on was self-service and self-interest, not public service in the national interest.
Yet again, God forbid any revelations compromise internal discussions or the reputations of foreign nations concerning Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein. Russia, China, Israel. Not looking good for them, is it? Also, I see my friend Charlie Sampson in the chat. He makes the point that this is no wonder why Labour turned a blind eye to the grooming gangs. This is a point that Carl Benjamin made on a stream a few days ago. The grooming gangs and Epstein's predation on children and also just prostitutes has the same motivation. This is why it's very important to discuss. Epstein was a Jewish ethnic supremacist. That is not to say that all Jewish people are ethnic supremacists, but it is to say that Epstein was and his network was. And so it is conspicuous that the victims were never Jewish women, in the same way that the victims of the grooming gangs were all white girls. Jeffrey Epstein used the word goyim in the same way that the Pakistani grooming gang perpetrators used kafir, white slag, white whore. They spat on the girls, they forced them to read Quran readings, they locked them in cages, they nailed their tongues to tables, all of these appalling abusive practices that Epstein could be credibly accused of doing too, at least the sexual abuse part. Some of the more outlandish claims, there aren't any evidence for them. But it's the same motivation. It's ethnic supremacy. And seems like Peter Mandelson was just fine with that. Fine to retain a friendship with him. And therefore, Keir Starmer was fine for Mandelson to become US ambassador despite knowing that he was friends with him. Now, why was Wes Streeting squirming so much? Well, if you're not familiar, Wes Streeting's fiancée was the political assistant to Peter Mandelson MP for 3 years. He's since scrubbed that from his LinkedIn, by the way. Funny how that disappears, isn't it? Yeah. Also, something just to note. Yet again, more paedophiles orbiting the Labour Party. This is Wes Streeting's ex-aide, Samuel Gould. Not good, is it? He was sentenced at Barkingside Magistrates Court to 22 weeks imprisonment, suspended for 2 years, so no jail time, after admitting 2 counts of indecent exposure to a 13-year-old girl. Very, very strange. Why are so many sexual predators orbiting the Labour Party these days? Why are they all orbiting Peter Mandelson and Keir Starmer? Must be a coincidence. It's just Keir Starmer's appalling judge of character. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for tuning in. Much appreciated, sir. So, who else is defending Keir Starmer? Well, until this afternoon, it was Harriet Harman. Harriet Harman was insistent that Peter Mandelson is the exception, not the rule. She would hate for people to think that all politicians are just as corrupt and perverted and deceptive as Peter Mandelson. I wonder where people would get the impression that politicians are a bunch of lying perverts from, Harriet Harman. Perhaps it might be from your involvement in a front group for the paedophile information exchange. So Harriet Harman, who is a senior member of the Labour Party, I forget what her actual current role is now. I think she's the mother of the house, isn't she? So she might be the... Or is that Diane Abbott? She is... Oh, she hasn't got an official title at the moment, but she does a lot of Labour rounds. Anyway, as the Mail has revealed, she held a role in a human rights organisation that furthered the aims of the paedophile information exchange. So she insists that she didn't know it was the paedophile information exchange. You're welcome to assess her claims on her own merits. But she was, when this was revealed, Labour's deputy leader. And her husband, Jack Dromey, who I think is now deceased, but he is also a Labour MP, and former Health Secretary Patricia Hewitt were all leading officials in the National Council for Civil Liberties. This granted affiliate status to the Paedophile Information Exchange, and the Paedophile Information Exchange at the time was asking for the age of consent to be cut to just 4 years old. During the 1970s, Hewitt described Paedophile Information Exchange as a campaigning counselling group for adults attracted to children. Yep, it makes me sick just to read out. So she knew exactly what it was, and she was working with Harriet Harman. The NCCL lobbied Parliament for the age of sexual consent to be cut to 10. It called for incest to be made legal in what one MP called a Lolita's Charter. It claimed that research showed young paedophile victims are often consenting or even the initiators of sexual acts. Harman, as NCCL legal officer, tried to water down CP laws. NCCL lawyers acted for a PI member who was quizzed by police over appalling behaviour. Spokesperson for Harman said this story is untrue and ridiculous. Doesn't look like it, though. I wonder, Miss Harman, why people think Labour is a party full of paedophiles and paedophile apologists. I couldn't possibly fucking fathom other than one of your senior grandees, the US ambassador, being best friends with the world's most famous paedophile, and you working for a legal firm that was affiliated with a paedophile advocacy group while you were trying to reduce the penalties for possession of CP. There are images, actually, I think, of Harman at an event for the NCCT that I think people have photoshopped the Pi logo onto because it's that infamous a story. Anyway, so because they've realised it's indefensible, a lot of people are shredding documents on their way out. So Alistair Campbell, for example, deleted the following tweet: Mandelson's a class act. Both he and Darling showed in different ways authenticity is what counts. He and Rory Stewart recorded a podcast praising Peter Mandelson's political acumen when he was appointed US ambassador. Zara Sultana, as well, has been deleting tweets. Her speaking to Noam Chomsky, given Noam Chomsky, the famous leftist, was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein's, keeps showing up in the Epstein Files, flew on the Lolita Express multiple times, visited the island, etc. So even the Labour left are contaminated by their affiliations with Epstein's broader network. Fleur has also clipped the following interview with Lord Falconer. Lord Falconer being a lawyer and a friend of Peter Mandelson. In fact, he was there when Mandelson was sworn in into the House of Lords, alongside Baroness J, 4 months after Epstein's first conviction, while he and Epstein were still friends. And Lord Falconer went on Sky News to talk about assisted dying, you know, the other pet project of Keir Starmer's government, killing off the elderly to save the NHS some money. I wonder who's setting that agenda. And Lord Falconer refused many, many times to talk about his friend Peter Mandelson and his deep connection to Jeffrey Epstein, his continued friendship to Epstein while he and Falconer were friends and in the House of Lords together.
Lord Falconer, while I have you, and as a senior member of the Labour Party, I do want to ask you about Lord Mandelson.
Well, do you mind if I don't go there?
Well, I thought you might say that.
Yeah.
I do kind of mind, because I know that you know him quite well.
Yeah.
You obviously worked with him during New Labour.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you the specifics, but I do want to talk to you about the way that this is impacting our politics at the moment.
Do you mind if I do? Because I'm talking about assisted dying today, which is such a big issue, primarily for the people who are affected by it. So I'm afraid I won't go there.
You're not going to comment at all?
Not going to comment at all.
You did speak for at least 5 minutes about assisted dying, and I do think...
No, I'm not going to comment at all. I'm really sorry.
Is that because you've had a conversation with him and he's concerned?
I want the focus to be on assisted dying.
We did talk about that for at least 5 minutes, and we went through it in quite a lot of detail.
I'm really sorry.
I thought that I might be able to convince you to at least say something, because, of course, you were there in the moment in the Lords when he sat down.
I'm really sorry.
Are you embarrassed by what's happened here?
I'm not remotely a bit embarrassed, but I really do want to focus on assisted dying.
We have talked about that. I'm going to ask you another couple of questions on it. Have you spoken to Mr. Mandelson about this? I know you're a friend of his.
I'm sorry. Can we leave the focus on Mandelson and go to assisted dying?
We started on assisted dying, and
he's desperate to talk about assisted dying, but don't worry. I think Keir Starmer's political career is currently being euthanized as we speak, so he's getting what he wanted, I suppose. The worst person in all of this, though, speaking of assisted dying, was Matthew Parris of The Times. Now, The Times is not Britain's paper of record, but rather the paper of reprobates, as we saw from Danny Finkelstein's article earlier. Danny Kruger was the other man who made some silly comments this week. Matthew Parris previously wrote in The Times that we cannot afford a taboo on assisted dying, and that people feeling pressured to take their own lives to save their family and the NHS and the pension system some money is actually a good thing. What else does Matthew Parris think is a good thing? Well, in this now deleted article that I've managed to find in the archives rather, someone else archived it, on the 3rd of February, it's like a portent from the gods, isn't it, really? He said, Labour owes a debt of gratitude, debt to giant politics in the modern era. Peter Mandelson has been on the right side of every important argument in the politics of the left since the 1990s. I don't know, would you call befriending the world's most famous nonce being on the right side of the arguments, Matthew Parris? I look forward to your answer. Peter's a man of wisdom and judgment in all but the conduct of his personal affairs. Understatement of the fucking century. Sorry, I try not to swear. Really? Peter Mandelson is wise and just, except for the whole befriending a paedophile and selling state secrets thing. Yeah, I kind of think the except overshadows everything else. Like, not to do Godwin's law, but it is a little bit like saying, well, you know, Hitler was a vegetarian. You know, Stalin had drip. You know, okay, I think the mass murder might be a bit more of a problem. Like, I don't care if Peter Mandelson was successfully able to orchestrate Tony Blair's government. One, I think Blair's government is evil, so I don't think there is a right side of the argument concerning Blair's government. But I also think befriending a nonce is kind of casting a long shadow here. Within his party, Mandelson has been a seminal, very poor choice of words, influence for good. He's one of a tiny band who originated, shaped and directed the only successful Labour government in living memory. So what you're saying is he's part of a nefarious small cabal that truly control the government. Okay. Time and time again, his advice, tactical as well as strategic, has been invaluable. Mandelson has been on the right side of every important argument in the politics of the left. And he says, so I have absolutely nothing to add to commentary about the latest Epstein revelations. Who at the Times published this? Like, I know they've deleted it. The reason I'm reading it out is because I want all of my content to be a matter of historical record, right? That's the real important bit that journalists used to do, and I wouldn't call myself a journalist because it's basically a slur nowadays. But I want you to have this on record, that someone at the Times thought it was a great idea to publish this article in the midst of a national scandal with Jeffrey Epstein's best friend selling out state secrets, in which it says, I know that there are some improprieties concerning his friendship with Epstein and his possible passage of state secrets to an international financier and paedophile, but I've just got no thoughts on the matter, really. I've just got nothing to add. It's sort of incidental. It's like talking about the weather. But think before you celebrate his effective... Sorry, I can't even make a sentence. Matthew Parris. Think before you celebrate his effective expulsion, though he jumped first from the House of Lords. There's a growing habit of calling for the expulsion of life peers of whom we've come to disapprove. This is a slippery slope. I don't want to know with what it was made slippery. Yeah, we should be stripping the peerages from lots and lots of people. Everyone appointed by Blair. Everyone appointed by the Tories. Everyone appointed by Starmer and the Lib Dems. Pretty much all the peers in the last however long should have their peerages stripped. Because the entire entitlement system has become illegitimate. Sadiq Khan has a knighthood. Tells you all you need to know. Tony Blair is a sir. Tells you all you need to know. But why on earth did this guy feel the need to defend him? Check his hard drive. There we go. But the Times decided it hadn't sunk to sufficient depths, having posted this Matthew Parris article and then retracted. No. They then did an interview with Peter Mandelson. Yeah. Katie Balls went to Peter Mandelson's house twice on Sunday, and then I think it was yesterday. No, sorry, it was on Sunday. Went to Peter Mandelson's house to interview him about that infamous photo of him in his underpants. And despite these images existing, despite knowing that he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, she had a nice chat with him. She had a chat with... They took really nice bespoke photos. Oh, it's a man and his dog cooking breakfast. Very normal. Apparently, Mandelson continues to dispute several of the allegations. Why hasn't he been arrested? He accepts that his husband took money from Epstein, whom he likens to the bubonic plague. Well, you said you were borderline in love with him in those emails, didn't you? To fund an osteopathy course. How odd. Why was Mandelson's husband needing his back fixed? Why accept it? Epstein told Ronaldo that he had an educational foundation, which gave bursaries or scholarships and offered one for an osteopathy course. I saw this as kindness, nothing more. It was a great help to Ronaldo, and I thanked him. In retrospect, it was clearly a lapse in our collective judgment for Ronaldo to accept the offer. At the time, it was not a consequential decision. Okay, but you knew he was a paedophile. Sorry, the logistics of you accepting the donation for whatever, incidental to the fact that he was a paedophile. He was a sex trafficker. And this is the important thing that gets lost in this, he was the central node of an international illicit financial network that was essentially blackmailing people, making dodgy business deals, controlling governments and foreign policy not to be in the interests of we, the sovereign people of our independent nations, and again, trading in state secrets. And was the kind of guy that called non-Jewish people cattle. Though I don't know if that's a concern of Peter Mandelson's. As for the alleged Epstein payments amounting to £75,000 to accounts linked to Mandelson between 2003 and 4, Mandelson insists he has absolutely no recollection or records of receiving his money, and I think I remember such a large sum. Well, I certainly would, and if anyone wants to give me 75 grand, so long as they're not, running an international paedophile network, I would be pretty happy to receive it. The fact that he was losing that, change down the back of the sofa means we should probably investigate what other business deals Peter Mandelson was doing during his time in government. It's interesting, by the way, MPs in Britain don't even have to report their stock tradings. So we don't even know the extent to which insider trading is going on. At least the Americans get to see Nancy Pelosi's stock trades and her unbelievable financial acumen. We don't know just how good our MPs are at insider trading. Oh, not insider trading. That, of course, I've never accused them of doing that. Of just playing the stock market the way that is intended. Mandelson says, I don't know what Epstein's motives were. Probably mixed. I think it was the noncing. I think his motive was basically the noncing and the financial blackmail. And the fact that he hated non-Jewish people. I think his motives are pretty clear, actually, in all of the texts and emails. The millions and millions of them we have. But he provided guidance to help me navigate out of the world of politics and into the world of commerce and finance, Mandelson says. Perhaps he wanted to be a mentor, and I was naive in regarding him as a good faith actor. There was no reason to shun his advice, but I was too trusting. He was always very free and forthright with his views, and always presented them as in my best interest. Ah yes, Peter Mandelson is just the poor victim of Jeffrey Epstein, notorious paedophiles, manipulation. Is anyone buying this? The better question is, why the fuck have the Times printed this? Why do the Times think it was important to interview Peter Mandelson at the midst of this scandal? Like, sure, maybe we just good that he incriminates himself with these quotes on record. Shouldn't he be sitting in a jail cell and all his devices seized? What does he say to those who say it's time that the Prince of Darkness finally retired and hid under a rock? I think that we should establish a cell underneath the jail and build another jail on top of it so we can never get out. He won't hear of it. Hiding under a rock would be a disproportionate response to a handful of misguided historical emails, which I deeply regret sending. If it hadn't been for the emails, I'd still be in Washington. Emails sent all those years ago didn't change the relationship I had with this monster. So, if you hadn't sent the emails and left a paper trail of you giving state secrets, probably taking money from, and befriending the world's most famous paedophile, you're saying you would currently still be US ambassador. He's saying that like we should all fucking regret it. Oh, it's such a shame I got caught, because otherwise I'd still be doing cocktail parties in Washington, D.C. Just, our entire political class are moral and sexual reprobates, thoroughly corrupt, utterly treacherous, and unrepentant for it. Clear the entire lot out. They all need to go. Every last one of them. And this is increasing the opinion of Labour MPs. I see we've got a couple of super chats and I'll address them at the end. If you have any questions that are pertinent to the topic at hand, I will answer them as we go. Otherwise, I will save the questions and comments that aren't pertinent to the topic for the end. But, according to Stephen Swinford, who does work at the Times, Labour backbenchers are now warning Keir that his own future is in doubt unless he sacks Morgan McSweeney. It's unlikely that he will. Carl Turner, a Labour MP, so they're putting their names to these warnings, by the way, so they feel comfortable enough to make the warnings, which means that either they feel confident that they can pressure McSweeney out or pressure Starmer out, because it's their whips and their careers on the line, remember. Turner says the mood on the backbenches is dire. He says unless Starmer sacks McSweeney, he will be up against it and will have to make a decision about his own future. He says the atmosphere in the Commons is the angriest he's seen it, but the anger is directed at advisors. He forwarded messages from people expressing their anger to the Prime Minister directly last night. He thanked me, and I suspect he thanked those who were the ones messaging him. My advice to the Prime Minister is get rid of those advisors who have frankly given terrible advice to him over the weeks and months. The PM needs to deal with that and make a decision. If the PM decides he has to be surrounded by advisors who have given shoddy advice, the reality of that is that the Prime Minister is going to have to make a decision about his future some point soon. If McSweeney is still in Downing Street, the PM is up against it. The problem is, though, without McSweeney, there is no Keir Starmer. Without Mandelson, there is no McSweeney. Ergo, without Mandelson, there is no Keir Starmer. And without Jeffrey Epstein, there is no Mandelson. Ergo, without Jeffrey Epstein, there is no Keir Starmer. So Starmer cannot wash his hands of this. In Lady Macbeth fashion, the blood spots will never come off. They are conceptual. They seem to be the only image that Keir Starmer is capable of visualising in his mind, considering he says he doesn't dream, he doesn't have a favourite book, can't rotate shapes. It's totally a soulless Borg, farming things out to procedure, but this time procedure has failed him, in his own words, but he can't blame procedure, because the man who apparently bypassed procedure is the man he's currently defending in the Commons, to whom he owes his political career. So he's screwed. He's going to be out. Keir Starmer will be out probably within the week. And God forbid Labour lose the Gorton and Denton by-election either to the Greens or Reform. It's looking like Reform at the moment, but Advance may well end up shaving some of the votes off Matt Goodwin's victory margin and cost him the victory, which will be an interesting thing to discuss as to whether or not Reform will then regret making such a large constituency of its discontents by alienating their local branches and retreating from their strong positions on immigration and taking too many Tory defectors. But if Matt wins it, I mean, that's excellent news. But whatever the outcome, Labour aren't going to win. Keir Starmer's hubris, blocking Andy Burnham from becoming an MP and therefore succeeding him with the help of Angela Rayner, hoping to cling on to a few more days in Downing Street, has cost him a seat, and ultimately it hasn't saved him from being ousted anyway. Total disaster. And that's why he's quaking in his boots trying to sabotage Matt Goodwin's candidacy in that speech, which, went down like a brick in a duck pond. And there are far more Labour MPs that are putting their name to this, and the fact that The Guardian is running these comments means that Keir Starmer has lost The Guardian. That's very, very important. He has lost the mouthpiece of the Labour Party that will defend them no matter what. And the comments in here are just damning. MPs said the eventual release of the documents, which may be delayed by a police investigation into Mandelson, about why Starmer chose to appoint Mandelson, and whether or not it was adequately raised, Mandelson's connection to Epstein, by the security agencies ahead of time, and whether or not Starmer ignored it anyway, could trigger a leadership challenge. Quote, "We need all the poison to come out," one MP said. One former minister said, "We've had a lot of bad days recently, but this is the worst yet, I think." The worst day of your life so far. While another MP warned, "Trust is finite. I'm personally not sure I could trust myself to back the Prime Minister in a confidence vote. The most terminal mood is among the super loyal," an MP from the 2024 intake noted. MP said Starmer's admission at Prime Minister's questions that he'd known about Mandelson's friendship with Epstein before his appointment was a clarifying moment. Quote, "You could feel the atmosphere was change. It was dark," one MP who had previously been close to Starmer said. So all his allies are abandoning him. Number 10 said afterwards the Prime Minister was only aware of what had been already in the public domain. Okay, you knew the guy was friends with the world's most famous nonce, and yet you appointed him anyway. That doesn't clear you, Keir. "It's just indefensible," said one backbencher. "They all knew about Peter's relationship with Epstein, but gave him the job anyway." Quite. "It's like Chris Pincher on steroids," they added, referencing the scandal that brought down Boris Johnson. The moment Keir admitted it, that was it. It was over. Labour think it's over. Labour think Keir Starmer is in the same position Boris Johnson was in the final week of his premiership. Keir Starmer's done. He's done. Now, whether this causes a Labour leadership election or an early general election for Labour to stem their losses, who knows? I think the Labour Party are so craven that they'll try to prolong a general election as long as possible because they know this is the last Labour government. But we could be in for very interesting time. We could be in for an early election. Who knows what happens then? Reform win it? Maybe can't form a majority? Probably the party that Rupert Lowe's promising to set up can only stand a few candidates, and maybe they win a couple and select seats, or maybe it's just Rupert. Who knows what happens? Lib Dems will probably become the official opposition. Strange times that we live in. Another minister said, "We were meant to be the ones who didn't do this stuff. It's time for a fresh start, the sooner the better." They all want him out. And this is what Barry Gardner said on BBC Newsnight. Barry Gardner, ever the theatric, used to go on GB News and argue with Rupert Lowe on Michelle Dewberry's show before he was banned. Disgraceful. If Barry Gardner is saying this on the BBC's flagship political show, it means Labour politicians are comfortable enough to call for Keir Starmer's head without fearing for their own careers. Let's listen.
Look, this was our manifesto, right? One man, one word, change. Yeah. That's what we promised. That was the whole of what we as the Labour Party promised this country, change. This looks more like the same.
Should he step down?
I think that he needs to think very hard about what is in the country's best interest.
So yes.
And what is in his party's best interest.
It's a veiled yes. You're saying that you don't want to say it, but you're saying it with your eyes. Arlene...
He didn't say no. He just stared because he knew the impact it would have. Starmer done. There were some MPs that said to The Guardian that Morgan McSweeney would be a sacrifice enough. One MP said, "The government is on the run. Goodness knows what will come out. There could be a lot of red faces and departures off the back of it." I think Streeton could well go at this rate. Number 10 had said it hoped the documents would prove Mandelson had lied about the depth of his relationship with Epstein. But on Wednesday night, the Met Police said it blocked the release of certain documents in the case in case they prejudiced a criminal investigation. I'm sure Starmer was practically begging them to give him that pretext to withhold certain bits of information. The Conservatives tried to trigger the release of the documents by adding to stop them adding exemptions for national security and international relations. Of course, MPs are calling the move a cover-up. Whips were warned they were on the brink of losing the vote from a backbench Labour rebellion, as Hillier and Angela Rayner rose in the Commons to argue for the role of the Select Committee, and were forced to draft a Second Amendment to appease MPs. Rayner, as Carl said, is the Red Queen, and she's on the movers. On manoeuvres. She is struck again, and she is claiming vengeance for Starmer throwing her under the bus. Backing Rayner for a leadership bid, an MP said, the sooner the day comes that she's making the original decisions, the better. Disastrous for the country. Good for whatever right-wing party stands against her. But if Labour think Angela Rayner is the answer, they really haven't got a clue what questions to ask. Certainly didn't ask the right ones of Peter Mandelson if they got these answers. And more MPs are seeking revenge against Starmer. This is, again, why Starmer's position is untenable. John McDonnell said he was going to vote against the government's amendment. This is so wide that it opens the Prime Minister to allegations of collusion in a cover-up. He's made too many enemies. From the purge of the Corbynites to the betrayal of the promise of protecting welfare and the Motability Scheme, to flip-flopping on strong migration rhetoric on the advice of Morgan McSweeney, to this scandal with Peter Mandelson. Starmer is universally hated by the Labour left, by the trade unions, by the press, by the public, by every opposition party, in broader culture, by America. The only people that seem to like him are Emmanuel Macron, who is the only political leader less popular than Keir Starmer, and the other bureaucrats in Brussels, who are all huffing their own ideological farts as they replace their populations and impoverish their countries at the threat of NATO withdrawing support for them. Starmer is an illegitimate leader. Parliament are all dead men walking. They're all going to lose their seats. Labour will be culled down to 4 if current projections are to be believed. It's untenable. He can't cling on. And then the fact that more Labour MPs are leaking to more outlets means that the ship is filling with water and the captain is going to go down with it. I'm so angry it's gotten to this point, one MP told the New Statesman. PMQ's made things so much worse. More than one described the current circumstances as a shit show, putting it mildly. Others said Starmer's performance was a car crash. This is rhetoric all reminiscent of the Boris days. One MP with little sympathy for the Prime Minister said this current crisis is of the government's own making. One left-wing Labour source said, today Keir tied himself so fully to McSweeney, they'll have to go down together. Maybe not in the exact same moment, but very closely. Another soft left MP said, I still want McSweeney out. Well, McSweeney's looking like cement shoes for Starmer, but Starmer realises that he owes his career to McSweeney, who owes his career to Mandelson, who owes his career to Epstein, so Starmer can't wash the stink of Epstein off. He's toast. And then there were the following comments given to the BBC, and these are just very enjoyable. Apparently, Labour MPs think the following about Starmer. It's been terminal for months, but the patient has now stopped responding to treatment. I genuinely think this is a slow burner, but will be that straw that breaks the camel's back. It's Boris Government 2.0 on digging themselves a deeper hole and not reading the room, I'm afraid. Our Labour MPs are such NPCs, they speak exclusively in cliches. Overblown, revenge of the Mancunian mafia, but if it wasn't already, Gorton by-election is now massive. So they're saying the Gorton and Denton by-election will kill Starmer off if this scandal doesn't. Calm heads need to prevail. The PM has done the right thing here. He's making sure. Certainly the minority opinion at this point. Public don't believe it, and only 5% of the public, according to YouGov, aren't paying attention to this. Most of the public think he's done the wrong thing. He's doomed. When you've got only 5% of the public not paying attention to a national scandal, you can't cover it up. And then there was the following Labour MP, senior Labour MP, Graham Stringer. And after 4 minutes of saying Keir Starmer's not out for the job, Martin Daubney asked him a very straightforward question.
Forthright to begin with.
Graham Stringer, final question. I'd appreciate a one-word answer if I could. Is Keir Starmer finished?
Yeah.
There we go. Graham.
Oof. He's out. He's done for. Even his strongest soldiers have abandoned him. Anna Soubry, day after the election. Is it just me, but everything feels normal? No more psychodramas and scandals. Like the grown-ups are back and government and people can get on with their lives, watching politics out the corner of their eyes. And even she's saying, yeah, hands up, this tweet hasn't aged well. Yeah, it's aged like milk. It's aged like Harriet Harman. It's just awful. And then there was Andrew Marr. Remember when Andrew Marr said on the BBC that Britain has become an island of stability after the election? Well, now he's gone out on LBC and said we've entered the final stage of the Starmer premiership. He says, I like Keir Starmer, he's a good man. In spite of all evidence. You know, fighting to stop Jamaican murderers from being given the death penalty. Calling parents that are concerned about migrant sex offenders or Axel Rudakabana killing their children. Far right. And, of course, appointing Peter Mandelson, best friend of a paedophile, as the US ambassador. No, still a good man to Andrew Marr's eyes and ears. He's the only man in media with more ridiculous ears than me. It's quite impressive, actually. Looks like an Aardman character. But if even Andrew Marr, if even Anna Soubry, if even Lewis Goodall and the newsagents, whose wife works for the Blair Institute, have abandoned Keir Starmer, if MPs are coming out, putting their names to statements saying you have to go, you are toast, you are done for, you and your advisor need to be sacked, Starmer's done. Starmer's totally done. And he was done, I think, over the Andy Burnham affair, because Polly Toynbee, who is the least intelligent leftist hag that you would have recognised from her debate with Matt Goodwin and Konstantin Kissin on immigration when she was on the side of Aaron Bastani, and frankly, Aaron made some dreadful arguments, but he looked embarrassed to be sat next to her. She was just rattling off the diversity is our strength talking points. When Starmer blocked Burnham, Polly Toynbee, one of the senior columnists at The Guardian, the kind of person that the inner Labour Party and the Blairite Project take seriously, she said the following, right at the bottom. Here is the Starmer strategy. A good and clever man not made for politics or leadership. His lack of arrogance and his earnest endeavour is what his admirers like, but his lack of political instinct and firmness of direction is a fatal flaw. His legacy will be far longer list of good things done than anyone heard tell because it was never told. How he goes and who succeeds is the next story. So that is a compliment sandwich. A hug as she digs the dagger into his back. That is a go now while we allow you to have your dignity. Because they're already talking past your legacy. They're already talking about Starmer in the past tense. Starmer's cooked. Who succeeds him? My money's on Shabana Mahmood. She's staying very quiet, tactically so, has done for quite some time, has the backing of Blair. We're going to get probably our first Labour, well, female Labour Prime Minister, but our first Muslim Prime Minister. She's going to beat Zia Yusuf to the punch, guys. It's going to be a bleak year in British politics. But at least it's been interesting already. The final thing I want to discuss, before I go to your super chats and wrap up, is something quite uncomfortable. It's something that I introduced at the start of this show, and it's that broader questions about Keir Starmer's wider network have to be raised. Because Peter Mandelson wasn't the only person leaking secrets about Gordon Brown to foreign sources. Gordon Brown was apparently going to call an early election. And this was around the G20. Apparently he thought his performance was stronger when dealing with international leaders, managing an economic crisis. And he thought that he would cut Labour's losses by calling the election early. And he scrapped this because it emerged that Damien McBride had sent emails to Labour aides about unfounded allegations about senior Tories, and McBride had to resign, so Brown had egg on his face. It was a total disgrace. But the intelligence about a surprise election was detailed in a US communique obtained to the Telegraph via WikiLeaks from Baroness Ruth Smeeth, who then was just the Labour candidate for Burton at the previous election. Why was just a random Labour candidate passing on confidential information about the general election from the government to American intelligence. They said that she should be strictly protected. Very conspicuous. Why was Ruth Smeeth so senior? And she, by the way, as far as we're aware, has received no repercussions for leaking these state secrets, unlike Peter Mandelson is facing now. Ruth Smeeth happens to be a senior member of the Labour Party. She is a baroness. She was on the board of Hope Not Hate. She was instrumental in bringing down Jeremy Corbyn on allegations of anti-Semitism. I think she did the Evening Standard interview that first put allegations of anti-Semitism front and centre during Corbyn's tenure. And if you remember, there were adverts run about Corbyn's anti-Semitism during the 2019 general election by the Sun newspaper, who backed Boris. Now, Bruce Smeeth works for Hope Not Hate. This is the same Hope Not Hate who, called me an anti-Semite when I interviewed Liz Truss. Same Hope Not Hate which helped Morgan McSweeney get Margaret Hodge elected as the Barking MP in 2010. The same Hope Not Hate that were campaigning in Barking and Dagenham in Lewisham, where Damien Egan was a councillor at the time. And Damien Egan is now on the Labour Select Committee group for Israel. And he's also on the counter-extremism group, probably taking advice on extremism from Hope Not Hate, like Dame Sarah Khan did. Damien Egan was the Bristol North MP who got banned from visiting a local school over his support for Israel. This is the same Hope Not Hate that enjoys a friendship with Lord Richard Hermer, who was part of the Jewish Students' Union while he was working with Searchlight with Nick Knowles. This is the same Hope Not Hate that employed Liron Vellerman, now a convicted paedophile, former Labour councillor, and former director of New North London Synagogue, and a member of Jewish Labour. Look, it doesn't bring me pleasure to draw my attention to this, though I'm sure it'll actually bring quite a few of my very right-wing Jewish friends pleasure, because they fucking hate these people. Like, you should hear what some of them have to say about Barbara Roche. So, I know they're watching. So, again, it's not all Jewish people. But there is a network who use their Jewish identity and the campaign to rid Labour of anti-Semitism, the campaign to fight anti-Semitism in broader society, as frankly, I think, cover for their insane ideological politics, in Peter Mandelson's case, his personal corruption, and their vicious conduct, whether it be political or personal. Again, Peter Mandelson's case, friends with a notorious paedophile. It's not exactly the most noble behaviour, is it? And I bring this up because Mandelson frequented Jewish Labour Movement events, and the Jewish Labour Movement did help make Keir Starmer Prime Minister and Labour leader. And here we see Ruth Smeeth and Margaret Hodge. And this is at Labour Party conference. This was a show that the Corbyn years are over and that Jews are welcome back in Labour again. And this is when Starmer, Lisa Nandy, Peter Mandelson, and Ed Miliband were putting on Jewish Labour Movement events. And this, again, is reported by Jewish News, so it's not an anti-Semitic outlet. Oh, it's David Miliband, not Ed Miliband. Nevertheless, 55 sessions take place over the course of a day of virtual discussion. The event will be held in partnership with Labour Friends of Israel, who are on the back foot a bit, given the party's being forced to appease Palestine at the moment, but They are still prominent in Keir Starmer's cabinet and government. There are 13 Jewish Labour MPs. Of course, Ed Miliband is in cabinet. And then, as I mentioned, Damien Egan. Damien Egan, who is a Labour Friends of Israel vice chair. Also, there was a section here. The conference also features journalist Gabriel Pogrond, who was the person who authored the book Left Out, looking at Jeremy Corbyn's tenure, in discussion with Peter Mandelson, in an event titled Bedtime Horror Stories. Now, if Peter Mandelson were going to do an event, I wouldn't have titled it Bedtime Horror Stories. And he was the one who wrote the book Get In about Morgan McSweeney that the BBC had mentioned in their article. Look, left-wing Jews seem to be engaged in a civilizational suicide pact by inviting the architects of our immiseration and destruction, the people that commit to suicide and terror attacks, against Jews and white English people alike. And this seems to be one of the guiding philosophies of Keir Starmer's government, which explains its insane attitude towards immigration, its belief that the far right are the greatest threat, the spectre of the 20th century, whereas we have the very real presence of jihadists and sectarian Islamic voting across the country, who are going to unseat many Labour MPs, and yet they can't adjust to combat that because their ideology doesn't allow. And this is the most uncomfortable part of the conversation. If Peter Mandelson was a part of the broader Labour, Jewish movement, Labour Friends of Israel, etc., if Keir Starmer was, if Mandelson is instrumental to Keir Starmer's government, if Morgan McSweeney inexplicably lived in a kibbutz for like 6 months, then are Epstein's attitudes also present among some members of the Labour Party? I'm not saying it's all members of the Labour Party. I'm not saying it's all Jewish members of the Labour Party. I'm not saying it's Labour Friends of Israel or the Jewish Labour movement. I have to put all those provisos in for when the inevitable clip is made to condemn me as some anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist blaming all Jewish people for the problems of the UK. I'm not. But Jeffrey Epstein was not exactly shy about his use of the term goyim. And look, I know some Jews will say it just means people. He is using it in a derogatory fashion. He said, "This is the way Jews make money and made a fortune in the past 10 years, selling short the shipping futures, let the goyim deal in the real world." And, for example, he was berating someone for not showing up to a Jewish holy day. It's simple. You behave just like the goyim you do not respect. After the holiday, I will be willing to share a meal. No sex, none. I love you. My Jewish studies said that at 13 you should become a man. It's not too late. Right, so Jeffrey Epstein seems to have tied his Jewish identity to paedophilia, which is really strange. But Jeffrey Epstein had very derogatory opinions about non-Jews. I just don't want to be governed by people that hate me for whatever reason. And so I also don't think Keir Starmer and his broader network have any moral legitimacy in saying, oh, well, we did the right thing. We fought anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I actually think you're all a bunch of moral reprobates, no matter what cause you seem to be saying that you champion. And so I think there need to be questions asked about the broader affiliations with Keir Starmer's project and paedophiles in light of Jeffrey Epstein and the Hope Not Hate employee, Velman. But also, I don't think we should allow ourselves to be beaten by the cudgel of anti-Semitism forever and the far right forever by people who are wielding that cudgel who are just evil. Absolutely evil. We shouldn't live under the long shadow of the 20th century because it allows people like Peter Mandelson to get away with the worst things imaginable. I think that's a perfectly sensible thing to say. I think I'm going to get utterly cancelled for it. I'm not even blaming all Jewish people, but I think that it's perfectly reasonable. We shouldn't allow people that hate us and are traitors to govern us. And that's why, because of the Mandelson scandal and all of the other things he's done, Keir Starmer has to go. Right. I hope that was informative, ladies and gentlemen. I will address the last few super chats that I got before I'll end the stream. From Dylan Ward for 999, thank you very much. Any upcoming longer videos on philosophy like the previous one on liberalism and the blank slate? And when's the Restore Britain podcast appearance? A Restore Britain podcast appearance will presumably be coming out after an upcoming paper that I'm publishing with Restore Britain releases, but of course the Rape Gang inquiry is taking up most of the time, and I'm helping prepare some stuff for that as of next week. But once the Rape Gang inquiry is out of the way, I'm sure that we'll be able to launch this new paper. I think you're all going to like the topic. I think it's going to be a very important and contentious debate that needs to be had. And also, any other videos? I've got one in the works on why the right is getting Islam wrong, both the anti-Islam and the increasingly pro-Islam right. But that has been delayed just because there's a lot of research going into it, and of course I've been writing that paper, I've been doing stuff for the inquiry, and I've been covering the daily news. I've also got 2 other streams already lined up and in the works. One on Reform UK's foreign policy, and why it might explain why Nigel Farage said that Epstein was a Russian agent. It's like, come on, Nigel. Russian? Like, he was working with the Russians, but that's not the only people he was working with. Come on, we just need to be honest about this, please. And another one on the spate of migrant crimes that have happened recently, because it's important for us to document exactly what they're doing to us and what never needed to happen in the first place. £2 from Paul Jones. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciated. Someone points out it's no longer called CP, but CSAM. Same purpose. It's all reprehensible. Should be given the death penalty. Right, if that's it, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope this is useful. I will be reposting these streams onto Rumble until I work out how Rumble simultaneous streaming works. I am in contact with the guys over at Rumble. They're meant to be helping me out, but please be patient. I'm retarded. Oh, someone sent in one final one before we head off. Again, you know, get them in quick. £5 from Salem Saxon. Thank you. What should a 20-year-old student be doing to equip himself to contribute to the movement, convert to law? It'd be very useful to have more lawyers capable of drafting parliamentary legislation. There will be an institution built soon, I hope, that grants fellowship, sort of like training, to young, sound people. Because those of you who haven't seen my video yet on why the right has a young white male problem will not understand this, but go and watch it. I think it's a good bit of content. We need our own institutions to train up our own guys. And it's not just about generating more podcasts or talking points. It's about generating policy, like detailed policy research, which Restore Britain has been doing. Harrison's done a good job on mass deportations. I think I've done a good job on my forthcoming paper. I look forward to Pete North complaining about it. God bless Pete. But also, we need an institution that trains up the future lawyers, political candidates, sure, but civil servants. Like stone cold killers to go into government departments, find out what they've done wrong, gather evidence, scrap legislation, that sort of stuff. The sort of CV building exercise the Trump administration did before they won in 2024. We need an institution that does that. At the moment, there aren't any, or there aren't any that are on our side. And so, when it exists, you'll be able to apply. But at the moment, in terms of what should you be doing to equip yourself, hide your power level. I think that at the moment we have a nice equilibrium of front-facing spokespeople. And I'd like to think that me getting cancelled from everywhere means that I'm capable of criticizing things from outside having any vested interests, which then makes other people's jobs in these institutions keeping their heads down easier. For example, I've spoken to people at Reform HQ that watch my stuff, and they agree with everything I say, and they're trying to change things. Like, I've spoken to people who work in influential think tanks, drafting legislation for the next government. I've spoken to people working in the Trump administration. Like, we have our guys everywhere. Be one of those guys. That is how you are most useful for the movement. And in the meantime, if you must post, do it as an anon. Don't do it publicly. Don't give Hope Not Hate an excuse to go after your workplace and use your boss's cowardice against you. When we win, we will hold them to account. But we have to have you guys in a position for us to win first. You have to be well-dressed, well-informed, well-spoken, capable. You must have a skill set that we can use in the next government. That is how you can help the movement. And if you want to ratio people on a frog account in your meantime, go ahead. Sharpens the skills a little bit. Anyway, someone as well, I just have to make this final observation because I've seen the point in chat. Someone says, why did I trim my beard? I put it on the wrong setting, and then my wife thinks it makes my jawline look better. What do you think, chat? Am I mogging? I'm not even mewing. Oh, and thank you for the £5 from Marcy. See? Chat is saying I'm mogging. I can't pull off a moustache, I'm afraid. I couldn't possibly do it. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope this was instructive, informative. Subscribe to the Substack, be a YouTube member, share this, etc. Again, this is my only revenue stream for the time being. I will... What should we do to save our country as young men? Go to church, lift, marry a nice woman, not Sarah Stark. I actually congratulated her on her engagement in her DM, so, you know, fell for it again award. Have kids, outbreed your enemies, read old books. Don't get yourselves in any legal trouble, because we're going to need you when the time comes to, you know, launch our political revolution through purely peaceful and patriotic means. We're going to need you to seize control of your own countries and reverse legislation and lead competently. Anyway, thank you for all your support. Take care. God bless. And goodbye.